These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
In the Thom Hartmann Book Club today, our book is by Frantz Fanon, and it's The Wretched of the Earth. This is from the chapter on national culture on page 145. It sort of reads like Thomas Paine, actually. Each generation must discover its mission, fulfill it, or betray it in relative opacity. In the underdeveloped countries, preceding generations have simultaneously resisted the insidious agenda of colonialism and paved the way for the emergence of the current struggles. Now that we are in the heat of combat, we must shed the habit of decrying the efforts of our forefathers or feigning incomprehension at their silence or passiveness. They fought as best they could with the weapons they possessed at the time, and if their struggle did not reverberate throughout the international arena, the reason should be attributed not so much to a lack of heroism, but to a fundamentally different international situation. More than one colonized subject had to say, "We've had enough." More than one tribe had to rebel. More than one peasant revolt had to be quelled. More than one demonstration had to be repressed for us to stand firm, certain of our victory. For those of us who are determined to break the back of colonialism, our historic mission is to authorize every revolt, every desperate act, and every attack aborted or drowned in blood. In this chapter, we'll analyze the fundamental issue of the legitimate claim to a nation. The political party that mobilizes the people, however, is little concerned with this issue of legitimacy. Political parties are concerned solely with daily reality, and it is in the name of this reality, in the name of this immediacy which influences the present and future of men and women, that they make their call to action. The political party may very well speak of the nation in emotional terms, but it is primarily interested in getting the people who are listening to understand that they must join in the struggle if they quite simply want to exist. We now know that in the first phase of the national struggle, colonialism attempts to diffuse nationalist demands by manipulating economic doctrine. At the first sign of a dispute, colonialism feigns comprehension by acknowledging with ostentatious humility that the territory is suffering from serious underdevelopment that requires major social and economic reforms. And it is true that certain spectacular measures, such as the opening of work sites for the unemployed here and there, delay the formation of a national consciousness by a few years. But sooner or later, colonialism realizes it is incapable of achieving a program of socioeconomic reforms that would satisfy the aspirations of the colonized masses. Even when it comes to filling their bellies, colonialism proves to be inherently powerless. The colonial state very quickly discovers that any attempt to disarm the national parties at a purely economic level would be tantamount to practicing in the colonies what it did not want to do in its own territory. And it is no coincidence that today the doctrine of Cartierism is on the rise just about everywhere. Cartier's bitter disillusionment with France's stubborn determination to retain ties with people it will have to feed, whereas so many French citizens are in dire straits, reflects colonialism's inability to transform itself into a nonpartisan aid program. Hence, once again, no need to waste time repeating, better to go hungry with dignity than to eat one's fill in slavery. On the contrary, we must persuade ourselves that colonialism is incapable of procuring for colonized people the material conditions likely to make them forget their quest for dignity. Once colonialism is understood where its social reform tactics would lead it, back come the old reflexes of adding police reinforcements, dispatching troops, and establishing a regime of terror better suited to its interests and its psychology. Within the political parties, or rather parallel to them, we find the cultured class of colonized intellectuals. The recognition of a national culture and its right to exist represent their favorite stomping ground. Whereas the politicians integrate their action in the present, the intellectuals place themselves in the context of history. Faced with the colonized intellectuals' debunking of the colonist theory of a pre-colonial barbarism, colonialism's response is mute. It is especially mute since the ideas put forward by the young colonized intelligentsia are widely accepted by metropolitan specialists. It is in fact now commonly recognized that for several decades, numerous European researchers have widely rehabilitated African, Mexican, and Peruvian civilizations. Some have been surprised by the passion invested by the colonized intellectuals in their defense of a national culture. But those who consider this passion exaggerated are strangely apt to forget that their psyches and their egos are conveniently safeguarded by the French or German culture, whose worth has been proven and which has gone unchallenged. I concede the fact that the actual existence of an Aztec civilization has done little to change the diet of today's Mexican peasant. I concede that whatever proof there is of the once mighty Songhai civilization does not change the fact that the Songhais today are undernourished, illiterate, abandoned to the skies and water, with a blank mind and glazed eyes. But as we have said on several occasions, this passionate quest for a national culture prior to the colonial era can be justified by the colonized intellectuals' shared interest in stepping back and taking a hard look at the Western culture in which they risk becoming ensnared. Fully aware that they're in the process of losing themselves and consequently of being lost to their people, these men work away with raging heart and furious mind to renew contact with their people's oldest inner essence, the furthest removed from colonial times. Let us delve deeper. Perhaps this passion and this rage are nurtured, or at least guided, by the secret hope of discovering, beyond the present wretchedness, beyond the self-hatred, something that redeems us.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Brand new day, a brand new show. Have Americans run out of empathy because of too many disasters? I want to dig into this a little bit. I think it's an absolutely fascinating topic. Also in this hour, my rant over at HartmannReport.com today is about how Congress can put the Supreme Court in a box. Yes, they can do it. They just never have, and maybe they will. We'll see. In the second hour, Greg Palast is going to talk about more judicial monarchy, forcing states to clean up the voting rolls, the Supreme Court's role basically in Republican voter suppression. And Ron DeSantis is winning the pandemic. We'll get into that in some depth in our second hour. In our third hour, tomorrow is Women's Equality Day, and Lala Wu drops by to talk about that. So that's what we have coming up on the program today, plus your calls at 202-808-9925. But all these simultaneous disasters, this is the, Jacob Stern wrote a piece in The Atlantic, and I think it's a good one and a good point. I noticed, you know, the weekend before last, something, I don't even remember what it was, and I snapped at Louise, and she was like, wait a minute, are you feeling grumpy? And I'm like, whoa, yeah, I am. And it's like, and we both were. I mean, it's like, how did this happen? You know, what do we do to fix it? And, you know, we ended up like hugging each other and kind of talking about it. But what I'm figuring out is that I'm suffering, and I think probably everyone is suffering from some sort of, you know, variation on something like post-traumatic stress disorder, or present traumatic stress disorder. I mean, you know, for a year, I couldn't see my grandchildren or my children. I couldn't travel. I've traveled my whole entire life. I couldn't be with my best friend, you know, Jerry, who went through back surgery, and then his wife died. He and his wife both got COVID. This is my best friend. I've known, you know, since the early 70s. He lives in New York. In normal circumstances, I would have hopped on a plane, done my show from New York for a few days, and slept on Jerry's couch. Couldn't do it. We have COVID. You know, I'm in almost 2 years, 600,000 dead Americans. I knew people who are now dead from COVID. And, you know, we're heading toward 1 million. In large part because of Republican efforts to play down the virus and discourage people from getting vaccinated simply because they want to try and crash the economy and make things look bad for Joe Biden. And then on top of that, we've got heat waves. It was 116 degrees here this summer. Fires, floods, storms, war. We're pulling out of Afghanistan, and, well, now it's actually, it looks like they're doing a damn good job now. They've got 75,000 people out of Afghanistan so far. But, you know, it's still, it's a tough time. There will be people left behind. There's no doubt about that. There will be some horrible footage coming out. You bet on it. And then on top of that, I mean, here in Portland, and I know this is happening up and down the West Coast, people who live in areas where winter comes and winter is hard are, you know, in some cases, their cities are providing them with free bus tickets out to the West Coast where the winters are mild. And, you know, so we've got this homeless explosion happening. Had a homeless guy, you know, chase Louise and throw a water bottle at her, go crazy on her. We had a homeless person try to break into our house. I mean, it's like, I've never experienced anything like this. It's nuts. We've got, on top of this, you've got people who are on the verge of becoming homeless because they can't pay rent. They can't get medical care because hospitals are full of COVID. So what do we do about this? Well, I've poured myself into my writing for the last 2 years. I've written 2.5 books, and I edited a third one that on veganism and diet that I want to publish one of these days. But I wrote this book, The Hidden History of American Healthcare, that comes out next week, and I wrote The Hidden History of Big Brother in America, you know, which won't come out until next spring. But it's like I just poured myself into. I started a new project in March, writing you know, a daily newsletter called HartmannReport.com. And, you know, it's like every afternoon, Louise and I spend probably a half hour to an hour figuring out what I'm going to write about. And then I go upstairs in my office and I sit there for 2 or 3 hours and I write the piece. And then in the next morning, I get up at 5 a.m. and I edit it for an hour or so and, you know, publish it. Then go in the office and record the podcast version of it. And it's like, you know, we've gotten busy is the bottom line of all this. My brother, one of my brothers, who is, you know, a computer programmer, has been taking classes, he and his wife, online about how to paint, and he's turned into a pretty good painter. How do you cope with this? And is this messing with our brains? This piece by Jacob Stern over on theatlantic.com, I thought was absolutely fascinating. It was titled "All These Simultaneous Disasters Are Messing with Our Brains." Right? I mean, outside of the generation that both had the flu epidemic of 1918 and fought World War I at the same time, I don't think we've seen anything like this. And pretty much there's nobody alive who was alive back then, or at least alive and old enough to remember it. So this is new to us. And I get it. I'm speaking from a place of incredible privilege. I actually have a house that I live in. I have a good income. You know, I'm an American. Think of the people living in like Syria who have, you know, where Donald Trump stabbed the Kurds in the back and said, okay, you're on your own. And then Turkey came in and started slaughtering them. And ISIS was, you know, and Bashir and the government. I mean, think about, you know, the Afghan refugees that are going to be that are happening right now. They're piling up on the Turkish border, and the Turkish troops are saying, no, you can't come through. They're piling up on I believe it was Tajikistan's border. Somebody called yesterday about that. How do we respond to this? Stephen Taylor, this psychologist who's quoted in this article by Jacob Stern in The Atlantic, talks about how in some cases our response is basically casual sadism. And I remember this. I was in Uganda, up in the Numalo, at the Numalo prison farm, up in the Karamoja region of Uganda. It was these are people who mostly subsist on drinking the milk of the animal. They're herders, right? And when Idi Amin's men went through, they murdered all the men and all the boys who were over maybe 12 years old enough to carry a rifle, and raped all the women. And so by the time we got there a year later, as the famine was really starting to bite, there were all these babies starving. And I remember sitting, there was this old Ethiopian priest, and he looked like he was 100 years old. And he's just this little shriveled up guy, this Ethiopian, who was kind of running the place. The Red Cross had left. That's why we went in. Actually it was me and Horst von Heyer, a guy from the Salem organization in Germany. And so we're sitting, and this guy, this old priest had a secret stash in the middle of a famine. I mean, literally, people were dying all around us. He had this little secret stash of passion fruit, and they were all shriveled up, these little blackened, shriveled up things, and he cut one open and was doling out to us these little wet, gelatinous seeds that were like, hey, moisture, food. And he says, what do you get when you give 5,000 starving people food? And I'm like, I don't know, what do you get? And he goes, 20,000 starving people. And he starts laughing. And it was like, gallows humor. How do you deal with this stuff? And then on top of that, we've got wildfires filling the skies with smoke. We've got earthquakes leveling cities. You've got a disaster in Haiti. You've got buildings collapsing in Florida. Joe Ruzak, a PTSD researcher at Palo Alto, he says, there's a sense that people's coping reserves are kind of finite, and you can diminish your reserves. Now, some people, and this is just like the Kauai study, which I've talked about for years on this program, where they looked at children of great poverty. These were children of migrant farm workers, sugarcane workers on the island of Kauai, Hawaii, where there was basically no escape from the poverty. And what they found was that a larger percentage of those children were highly resilient, even though they were the victims of grinding poverty and terrible abuse. And a higher percentage of them than normal were very fragile. In other words, the middle, okay, I'm sort of resilient and sort of fragile, that middle got much, much narrower, and the two extremes, highly resilient and highly fragile, were exaggerated. I'm guessing that's what's going on. But what do you do? I mean, one of our sponsors, we've got, this sponsor, Annie's Kit Clubs, and, on the commercial side of the show. And they've got a new program that they're advertising on our program, where they're talking about, if you crochet, you can get this kit every month to crochet something, and they have this list of charities, and they give it to people in need. So it's like people are finding ways to kind of reactivate their empathy. I've been finding myself spending a lot more time just like as I'm walking around outside, or even just sitting in the house, just looking up or looking out at a tree or the sky or the skyline or the river or whatever, and saying, wow, thank you, God, for this. Thank you for this life. Going through in my mind the names of people I know as I essentially am saying prayers for them, hoping that each one is getting a little shot of light. I've gotten to where I'm like religiously, no pun intended, doing that every single day. It's like my coping mechanism. How do we deal with this? And how do we deal with the people who want to make it worse because they think it's going to benefit them politically? How do we deal with the rage about that? I mean, when I look at Republicans, and then sometimes there's like, this, is it Schadenfreude, the kind of joy in others' pain? Senator Andre Jacques DePere of Wisconsin. Excuse me, Andre Jacques of DePere, Wisconsin. He's a Republican lawmaker who's spent the last couple months telling people that masks are, a violation of your freedom, and vaccines are terrible things. Well, He's on a ventilator now. He's probably going to die. And, you know, part of me wants to say a prayer for him, and part of me is like, hey, I hope a whole lot of people hear about it. It's a tough time. And I think, you know, step one to figuring out how we heal through this, how we come through this, is acknowledging that it's a tough time. And talking about the strategies that we've all come up with to try to make it through a tough time. Your thoughts on that?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
And also, I want to tell you about my rant today about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court is like on really thin ice here, and we need to call them out. I'll tell you about that after the break. And welcome back. Eugene in Nanticoke, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eugene, what's on your mind? Thanks for watching us on Free Speech.
Yeah, I've called a couple of times before. I'm feeling the same way. I'll tell you what, it's been like this maybe, past 2 years or so. I have some physical issues. I'm not an invalid, but I'm pretty much immobilized. I manage to do shopping and go to the doctor and pick up prescriptions, but basically it's stay at home. And how I've been coping with it is, you know, in this weather, well, it's been extremely uncomfortable here. It's always been in the 90s with very, very high humidity. But in the evenings when it cools down a little bit, I've been doing some things in the yard, planting some shrubs and some bushes and things like that.
Which is kind of hopeful stuff. You know, if you're planting something that's going to grow, that implies that you have a sense of a future that's coming, a positive future.
Yeah. Well, I'm not a quitter. I was in quite a bit of pain with my physical condition, but I always pushed harder. You know, try to go past my limits. So I've been coping with the issues by doing things like that. I was in the emergency room twice with vertigo. They ran every test under the sun. They couldn't find anything. My personal feeling is I was just overwhelmed with everything, with the heat, with what's going on in Afghanistan, with the Republicans and their false voting. What's what I'm looking for? Recall,
voter suppression,
all that.
all this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, and you know what? I live along the Allegheny Mountain Range, and to tell you the honest truth, the mountains are quite beautiful, but when I look at them, I see coal, I see arsenic, I see cyanide, I see chromium B, you know, poisons that the Susquehanna River was running red with sulfur mine acid for years and years. It's beginning to clean up a little bit now. Mm-hmm. And even though coal was an important part of our industrial revolution, it contributed to the steel industry and the railroads. Its time has passed, and well, I don't know. These are just things that, you know, there's nobody here to talk to this about. I mean, it's like a bunch of people running around with like ostriches with their head in the sand.
Well, you wonder, Eugene, if some of the right-wing stuff that's happening out there is also, you know, a coping attempt. You know, getting guns and behaving like a tough guy, and it's got to be the fault of those black people or brown people or immigrants.
Oh, yeah.
You know, is that also a way of dealing with stress? Dysfunctional, but. Well,
personally, my opinion is the area is becoming more integrated with the mix. And I'm seeing a diversity of people, and people that do not look like me, I find are just as warm and friendly as anybody else.
That's great.
So, well, there's music. So I just wanted to call in and let you know how.
Well, thank you for sharing that, Eugene. And the planting of the bushes, that really resonates with me. You know, it's like planning for the future. Eugene, thank you. It's nice to hear from you, and I'm glad that you're making it through. It's 22 minutes past the hour. Stick around. I got to tell you about the Supreme Court. Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com.
So for our Thom Hartmann Insider videotape that is over, or videotape, YouTube, whatever you want to call it, private video that's available over at ThomHartmann.com, I'm talking this week about Donald Trump just completely giving in to Erdogan of Turkey, the president of Turkey, the dictator of Turkey now. And this theory that Jared Kushner okayed the killing, at least the capture, perhaps the killing of Jamal Khashoggi, and to Mohammed bin Salman, and that Erdogan has the tape of it, and that when he called up Donald Trump a couple weeks ago and said, I want you to pull out of Syria and give me those Kurds so I can kill them and take that land, that he did it because Erdogan threatened him. And then Erdogan comes to the United States, a week or two later and gets a whole state dinner thing. Check it all out. It's over at ThomHartmann.com. I think you'll find it fascinating.
And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And boy, what a day it is, huh? What an absolute day it is. Okay, I want to tell you about the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court, there's multiple articles scattered around. There's a couple of good ones over at rawstory.com about how the Supreme Court is basically up to two things. One is we now have 3 justices on the court who have essentially come right out and said that if the Republicans, using these new laws in these states, try to throw the Electoral College vote in 2024, regardless of how it turns out, from the official count, if they want to throw, let's say, Georgia and Florida and Arizona all vote for, let's just pretend Joe Biden and Donald Trump are, on the ticket in 2024. They all vote, they send their electoral votes to Joe Biden. And then the state legislature says, we're just going to ignore that. We passed this law that says we can ignore the electoral vote, and we're going to send a slate of electors, because we get to choose under the Constitution. We're going to send Donald Trump electors to Washington, D.C. To hell with what the people said. And so far, we've got at least 3 members of the United States Supreme Court saying, yeah, I'm down with that. John Roberts, Sam Alito, and Clarence Thomas. And we don't know what the opinion of the rest of them is. Particularly Kavanaugh, Barrett, and Gorsuch, the people that Trump put on the court. In addition, you've got like this stay in Mexico policy, basically some of the most brutal policies of the Trump administration with regard to immigration. The Biden administration tried to fix them or undo them, and you've got Trumpy judges saying, oh, no, you can't do that, Biden. So I'm pointing out in this article over at HartmannReport.com in great detail how John Roberts, when he worked for Ronald Reagan in 1981 in the U.S. State Department, or in the White House, John Roberts wrote this long memo saying, Congress can just overrule the Supreme Court. It's right there in Article 3, Section 2. You've all heard me rant about it forever. I've been talking about this for years. I wrote a whole book about it, The Hidden History of the Supreme Court and the Betrayal of America. And here I am laying this stuff out, hoping that some members of Congress are listening, saying, you can overrule the Supreme Court. You can put the Supreme Court in a box. You can regulate the Supreme Court, and you can create exceptions to what the Supreme Court can rule on, because it's right there in Article 3, Section 2 of the Constitution. Don't believe me? Look it up. So we'll see where that goes. Pick up your phone calls after this.
You're listening to the Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Have you found any interesting, unique coping skills through this time, through this difficult COVID time that you'd like to share? We'll be right back with your calls.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Unsettling Truths, the ongoing dehumanizing legacy of the doctrine of discovery by Mark Charles and Soon Chan Ra. This is from chapter 1. You cannot discover lands that are already inhabited. I, Mark, said this almost under my breath as I walked past a line of men dressed as Spanish sailors from the 1490s. I was in front of Union Station in Washington, D.C., near the massive statue of Christopher Columbus overlooking the United States Capitol. Every Columbus Day, there's an official ceremony in this plaza honoring Columbus as the discoverer of America. I had stumbled upon this ceremony by accident the year prior. There were a few non-natives holding signs and protesting the ceremony, but nothing very disruptive. I went back the following year primarily out of curiosity. I wasn't intending to protest, nor did I want to make a scene. As I walked up behind the statue and approached the group of men dressed as Spanish sailors, the words just came out of my mouth. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I walked further down the line, I said it again, this time a little louder. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. As I continued walking, I came to the front of the line where a group of men dressed in suits were standing. I repeated myself, making sure they could hear me. You cannot discover lands already inhabited. Suck it up, was the reply I heard as I kept walking. By this time, I'd walked around the statue and reached the front where a small stage had been erected and chairs set up for people to watch the ceremony. It hadn't started yet, but more than half the audience was seated waiting for it to begin. So I stopped near the center, turned toward the crowd, and in a calm but loud voice, I said to the people, you cannot discover lands already inhabited. That process is known as stealing, conquering, or colonizing. The fact that America calls what Columbus did discovery reveals the implicit racial bias of the country, that Native Americans are not fully human. Quickly, one of the white men dressed in a suit walked over and interrupted me. You are not welcome here, he said as he grabbed my arm and began walking me away. I attempted to explain the inappropriateness of both celebrating this holiday as well as hosting this ceremony, but instead of engaging in conversation, he threatened me with arrest and escorted me from the area. As I walked away from the gathering, I was amused at his words and the irony of their context. A white man participating in a public ceremony honoring Christopher Columbus as the discoverer of America, telling a native man he was not welcome in that space. How did a flawed assumption about the place of the indigenous population in U.S. society become normative? How are assumptions so deeply ingrained in the American psyche and imagination that dysfunctional and oppressive actions emerge? How did a dysfunctional idea and worldview form that allows for the displacement of native bodies? One of the explanations for the formation of this dysfunctional worldview is the doctrine of discovery. The doctrine of discovery is a set of legal principles that govern the European colonizing powers, particularly during the administration of indigenous land, regarding the administration. It is the primary legal precedent that still controls native affairs and rights, and international law formulated in the 15th and 16th centuries. From a theological perspective, the legal and political role of the doctrine of discovery is rooted in a dysfunctional theological imagination that shaped the European colonial settler worldview. The doctrine emerged from a series of 15th century papal bulls, which are official decrees by the Pope that carry the full weight of his ecclesiastical office. On June 18, 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the papal bull Dum Diversus, which initiated the first set of documents that would compose the doctrine of discovery. The official decree of the Pope granted permission to King Alfonso V of Portugal, quote, to invade, search out, capture, vanquish, and subdue all Saracens, Muslims, and pagans whatsoever, and other enemies of Christ wheresoever placed, and the kingdoms, dukedoms, principalities, dominions, possessions, and all movable and immovable goods whatsoever, held and possessed by them, and to reduce their persons to perpetual slavery, and to apply and appropriate to himself and his successors the kingdoms, dukedoms, counties, principalities, dominions, possessions, and goods, and to convert them to his or their use and profit. End of quote from Pope Nicholas's papal bull of 1452. Doomed verses would identify the Saracens, a common term for Muslims at the time, and pagans, essentially identifying any non-Christians as others, as those who could be targeted for, quote, perpetual slavery. The papal bull intentionally used language that identified those outside the European Christian world and enforced the Western theological imagination of non-Europeans as other. The Portuguese took these ecclesiastical statements to heart and perpetrated the slave trade from the African continent to the European and the American continents. As a Christian ruler, the King of Portugal would have power endowed from the church to take possession of the other as slave labor from the continent of Africa. The pagan African body was just another commodity to be taken for the pleasure and profit of the European Christian body, the one made most fully in the image of God. In the January of 1454, Pope Nicholas authored another bull. The book is Unsettling Truths by Charles and Ra. Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Just a reminder that my daily rants are published every day over at hartmannreport.com. And our podcast, our 1-hour podcast of the show, which is entirely free, is available through, iTunes and all the normal places where you find podcasts, cut down of our show. And that we post a weekly video over at thomhartmann.com. And the one this week is about seditious conspiracy, U.S. Code 2384. And the argument I'm making is that this law, which imposes 20 years in prison to, by force, prevent, hinder, or delay the execution of any law of the United States, end quote, is something that we should be seriously considering dusting off and applying to not just the people who showed up on January 6th, but the people who sent them there. Check it out, thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Robert in Bainbridge Island, Washington. Hey, Robert, what's on your mind today?
Oh, well, Tom, two things that are really important. Actually, a third I just noticed. Bainbridge Island now has over 90% people vaccinated and wearing masks at all times. Guys. Well, I'm telling you, that's not all our county doesn't follow that. So Kitsap County is having a horrible, horrible outbreak right now. With the worst case incidents that we've had during the whole pandemic, because a lot of people in Kitsap County are not wearing masks, not getting vaccinated, et cetera.
We're seeing the same thing in the red counties here in Oregon. They're just exploding, and the hospitals are overwhelmed. They're sending their people to the Blue County hospitals. Absolutely across the water to Seattle.
But that's why they have a bumper sticker in Kitsap County. It's called Clear Cut Bainbridge, because Bainbridge happens to be a little bit more progressive area in Kitsap County, and so they want to clear cut it of all the trees and maybe all the people too. I don't know. Yeah, but, I have a friend. Anyway, I have friends who live there, actually, on Bainbridge. Yeah. Well, it's more progressive, that's for sure, which is nice. It's safer for people too. But the reason I was calling is that a few calls back, you highlighted something very important that a colleague of mine, when I worked as a consultant for the VA, Joe Ruzak, has talked about PTSD and the adaptive reserve that people have to cope with awful things. I wanted to let you and your audience know that while I was doing that work for the VA, we developed something called resilience enhancement, which is a programmed approach to putting together all the most effective coping mechanisms, coping skills, coping behaviors that we could find in the literature, and putting it into sort of what you'd call a psychoeducational package. And that's available as a download if really you would care to have. Where? Yeah, I've got it on my computer. I couldn't do anything with it right now, but I can send that to you. You said it's available as a download. Is it on a public website someplace? No, it's on my computer. Oh, I see. Okay. but I can make it available that way. And plus, if I just gave it to you, you have a pretty public.
Yeah, but if it belongs to a private organization, there's probably a copyright associated with it. I mean, you know, you want
it belongs to me.
Yeah.
It belongs to me. It
belongs to you because you wrote it
by the VA. Yeah.
Okay. In that case, geez, if you can toss it on some kind of a server, even on at a wall, and then tweet it, I mean that would be a start. But Robert, we can I'll leave it to you to figure out the details of how to get it to people and how to tell people about it on this program. But for right now, can you just summarize very quickly what it is that you're talking about here? What are these solutions? Well,
the truth of the matter is that there's different categories of coping. So one of them is what's called cognitive coping skills, which is what we call how you appraise the world, what you make of it.
Right.
It turns out that that's the most important part of the whole equation, is that, you know, as you see the world, you respond.
So this is the old thing that it doesn't matter what happens to you. What matters is the story you tell yourself about what happens to you, how you interpret an experience.
Exactly. That's been shown to boost your cognitive coping reserve.
That was the main outcome, you know, of the Kauai study. This was a 40-year longitudinal study, as I recall. It was done from the 1940s to the 1980s among these, you know, highly vulnerable children stuck, you know, the children of sugarcane farmers on Kauai, Hawaii. And what they found was that the children who ended up more resilient than average as a consequence of exposure to grinding poverty and child abuse were the ones who told themselves the story that they were not the ones at fault, that somebody else was at fault, and they had inner resources. And then they looked at the children who just fell apart, the ones who became less resilient, more fragile as a consequence of this exposure to poverty and child abuse. And they told themselves the story that it was their own fault. They internalized the blame, and you know, or they told themselves the story that they lived in a world that absolutely made no sense, and they were unable to make sense out of it. And as a consequence of that, they became more fragile. These are all cognitive skills, that is, thinking skills, and we actually have some control over the stories we tell ourselves about what happens to us. We have default stories.
We have much more control than we think we do. Sometimes
absolutely. We have default stories that go back to childhood, but we can reinvent new stories at any time.
That's the basis of PTSD, by the way, is that you have a horrible story that somehow allowed you to survive a trauma, especially in childhood, and it no longer applies, but it still recurs in your thinking. So that's one of the strategies. Another one is what's called soliciting social support, because many people who are coping with awful, awful things begin to feel like they're all alone. And so we have ways of prompting people to solicit, support from people they know and from the community at large. And especially with vets that we worked with, that was a very serious problem because they couldn't, soldiers were trained to not admit any vulnerability, weakness, second thoughts, and so forth. So creating groups where we did this resilience enhancement was very influential.
Well, this is also one of the reasons why I refer to this program as your media support group for We the People. I mean, we are here together. I think talk radio actually fills a social vacuum that has emerged with the latter part of the Industrial Revolutions, particularly starting in the 1950s. As we and moved out to the suburbs, and we became more isolated from each other, and we didn't live in tenement buildings anymore where we hung out with our neighbors on the fire escape and all that kind of stuff, that social media, Facebook and things like that, and talk radio both kind of fill that space.
Absolutely. And I think it's partly, like you say, due to the changes in the way we live. Back when people lived in smaller groups, 15 or less, there was very, very strong support for all kinds of behavior. And as people went to cities and had anonymity that they could, forget their past or hide or whatever.
And we're wired for that social experience.
Exactly. So
that's what evolution prepared us for.
Well, that's something that I'm a public health neuroscientist. That's called a mismatch disease, where our evolutionary past wants us to do something like eat as much fat and sugar as we can, to survive on the savannah. And then our current reality is if you go to McDonald's, you can get as much as you want with no problem. And people, that's why obesity is such a problem.
Yeah, well, this is my book on hunters and farmers. The people with ADHD are actually, you know, they're carrying a skill set that would provide them with an outstanding ability to survive in a hunting-gathering world, but it's less useful in a farming or industrial world.
Absolutely, yeah. It's actually harmful, I think, in many ways.
It can, yeah, it wounds people. Yes, absolutely.
The final part of the package, final part of the package, Tom, is something that we developed. It's a physiological intervention. It's a self-soothing, self-calming technique using a type of biofeedback called heart rate variability, and it's been shown to improve people's ability to cope with all sorts of disasters and painful processes and difficult situations. So we put that into a package where all people we worked on would actually learn how to do that. It's available pretty generally now, actually, but it's not really the sort of more scientific version of it. It's now more of a cartoon with Apple Watches and so forth.
So Louise and I have like kind of 3 adaptive things that we've been doing that might fall into this category. I'd love to get your feedback on. Number 1 is every single day we walk for about 2 miles. And we don't just walk, we also, as we're walking, try to have a moment of awe, AWE. You know, we try to find things to, oh, look at those clouds in the sky. Isn't that beautiful? Or look at the river over there, or look at that duck, or look at, you know, this plant really, I mean, whatever. Just try to find something that's like, oh, yeah. So that's number 1. Number 2 is I've been meditating using this Muse headband, you know, an EEG neurofeedback headband, and I find it very, very useful. And then number 3, I haven't done it so much this summer. I do this mostly in the winter. Back when I broke my back skydiving when I was a teenager, I discovered that if I took long, hot baths, you know, my back didn't hurt. And so I've been doing that. It's a physical thing. And we got one of these kind of percussion, and it's not really a vibrator, it's a massage machine, you know. And Louise and I have been doing each other's bodies this way. These all seem to me like they're actually therapeutic psychologically.
They are. They're therapeutic. Not really what we found in doing some research on this is that it's not just therapeutic psychologically, but in the larger sense of, you know, therapy, meaning healing in all regards, physical, emotional, spiritual, as well as psychologically important. And I wanted to say that your walk has the potential of 2 important elements. One is that, you know, Hippocrates had a famous saying that everybody knows called, first of all, cause no harm.
Right. The Hippocratic Oath.
What was the second thing he said?
I don't know.
Follow the healing path of nature. And going out in nature has been shown many times to produce lots of really good.
Oh, they did an amazing study where they showed that people in hospitals who had a window that looked out over something green recovered faster than people who didn't have a window.
They recovered faster. They used less pain medication. They needed less follow-up. That's Roger Ulrich's study that's about 30 years old and is largely ignored. But
it's never been debunked.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's used now. It's environmental psychology. It's used by people that pay attention. Yeah. Well, thanks for the chance to put that out there.
Robert, thank you for a well-focused, tightly, you know, a nice, tight, concise summary of you know, a bunch of things that we can be doing, and that was brilliant. It's absolutely brilliant. And if you figure out a way to make it available on the internet, you know, drop me a note or let me know somehow, and I'll do whatever I can to promote it. Robert, thank you very much for listening to us there at Bainbridge Island. We'll be back coming up on 48 minutes past the hour.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
How are you getting through these times? You know, I find myself praying more, too. It's interesting. We'll be right back. And welcome back, Russ. And Russ, you're listening to a commercial station. Let me put you on hold, and I'll pick you up when we're back on the air with them. Steve in St. Petersburg, Florida, listening on the Thom Hartmann app. Hey, Steve, what's on your mind today?
Well, first of all, thank you, as always, for bringing up the big picture topics that nobody else is discussing. I'll be as brief as I can. We are already in the 6th mass extinction event.
Yes.
And humans are pretty clueless, unlike other animals, as to when a horrible disaster is coming. But we're picking up on it, and we're panicking, just like the last 2 hours on the Titanic. That accounts for a lot of this so-called stress. It's fear. It's everything. Now, how do you cope with reality? First of all, I would say that depression is anger turned inwards, and that it's time for us to accept reality that the human experiment is, basically destroying the biosphere, and we're going to go through some Mad Max movie-style hard times. Another movie would be The Road. We're going to see it in our lifetime. Well, how do you deal with reality? First of all, don't turn the anger inwards. Fight back by standing up for the innocent native flora and fauna that our species is destroying. Planting trees that are native, defending native wildlife is another thing. Beware of going into too much weed, too much booze, too many antidepressants. Number 3, extreme exercise, not just walking. I'm glad you guys walk, but raising your heart rate up enough to get your endorphins and dopamine system engaged. Number 4, find affinity groups. Number 5, give voice to the voiceless. Number 6, recognize that, as the Buddha said, life is suffering. There's no way around it, and embrace your grief, your mourning, your anger, and your sadness about what our species has done to this world. That's how I cope.
I think that's brilliant, Steve. The one slight tweak I would make to it is that I do not believe that what we are doing is human nature. I believe that what we are living in is a highly dysfunctional culture, and that that history, particularly paleo history, demonstrates to us, and tribal people are still alive today that we can learn directly from, demonstrates to us that humans do have the ability to live in a way that is sustainable and that is in balance and harmony with their natural environment. We have that ability built into us. We just have to keep learning the lesson to get there. And you look at the Melanesians who took over the British New Caledonia Island, or New Zealand, for example, the Moire people, and they all went through this cycle of basically wiping out their environment and then saying, holy crap, and then figuring out a way to live that was sustainable and reinventing their societies. And so, I see hope actually in all of this, Steve.
Well, one reason we love you, Tom, is because you still have rational-based hope, and I will go with what you're going with. And I hope everybody can understand that, it's the Titanic. They had 2.5 hours. We might have 2.5 decades, but we better get things going fast in the right direction, or else God help us all.
Well, and there are lifeboats, and I think we have to acknowledge some people are not going to get in them, and that's what we're seeing around the world. I mean, there's famines and displacements and refugees, and that's a terrible, terrible thing. We need to do everything we can to ameliorate that situation. But building the lifeboats and expanding the lifeboats while we still have the time now, and charting a new course. I'm just mangling this metaphor, Steve. But thank you
for everything, Tom.
Yeah, good talking to you, Steve. Thank you very much for your acknowledgement. I appreciate it. It is 9 minutes before the hour. Share the Thom Hartmann Program with your friends. We're available on SiriusXM, Free Speech TV, Pacifica, commercial stations nationwide, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, on the Thom Hartmann app, and you can even tell your smart speaker to listen to the Thom Hartmann Program. Over at the Thom Hartmann website, thomhartmann.com, we have, the full podcasts and there's just a lot of information, and our newsletter. And the newsletter is extraordinary. It's free. Sue puts it together every day with her stack, and it's just great content. Links to every single article that I talk about on the air, and things that are peripheral to them as well. It's really worth the effort. And then, of course, at HartmannReport.com, there is my daily rant, which is typically incorporated into the program, but it's a written version of it, and that's also something that there's no cost for that at all. So you can check that out as well. Also, we've got a new video up about the dueling memes. If at first you don't succeed, try again, or the definition of insanity is doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Schumer is going to try to do what Harry Reid did in 2013 by forcing votes. Will it work? We'll see. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. 8 minutes before the hour, or 53 minutes past the hour, or whatever, however you say it. Gary in Alpharetta, Georgia. Hey, Gary, what's up?
Hello, Thom Hartmann. Thank you once more.
Hey, Gary. Greed has no heart.
Thank you. Thank you. And again, this is the core of my little rant. And I can appreciate you saying what you say more and more. You find yourself prayers. And I think that is, you know, I don't talk religion. You don't talk religion. But there is an aspect of it, which is true, and it's a good thing. And walking, I think that's a great thing to do. Great thing to do. So why did I call? I called, for one thing, to quote FDR before I close the conversation down. But to me, every day, if you're searching for that one element, it's always more clear to me every day that humility is the opposite of pride. Mm-hmm. And I think, frankly, I think that's the root of our problem in America. There comes a point where does this make sense? You'll tell me, and I'll listen to you. It comes a point where there's too much wealth in a civilized society.
I'm not sure it's a matter of whether there's too much or not enough wealth, although obviously if it's not enough, you've got, you know, a real crisis. Look at what's going on in Haiti right now. But it's because so much of that wealth was extracted by greedy individuals, you know, whether it was the French or whether it was, you know, people who were put in charge of the country and just bled it dry. So I think it's more the distribution of wealth, Gary.
Okay, well, but we're on the same page.
Yeah.
It's called greed.
Yeah.
Greed is personal, too. Greed is how you treat other people, as I said before, and how you administer government.
Yeah.
How you administer government. So in closing, if you don't mind, I'm going to quote FDR from 1937.
Mm-hmm.
Here's what he said. We have always known that heedless self-interest was bad morals. We know now that it is bad economics.
Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. And thank you, Gary. Thank you for that. It's great to hear from you. Let's see here. Bob in Portland. Hey, Bob, what's up?
Well, your opening rant reminded me of an old saying from the I Ching that says you can't fight evil directly. You make energetic progress in the good. And I think when you described what you did, writing 2 books, I come from a place of relative privilege. I'm a musician, but I was able to play online for most of the year and make some money. Mm-hmm. I started opening up and playing in nursing homes again and just got shut down because of it coming back. I was playing outside and I'm not going out anymore. Because it's too risky. So I just got to find something good to do to take up my time, and that's what I've done for the last year and a half. And I think the thing we need to do most now for energetic progress in the good is to take back the state legislatures. We need to, every 2 years, the legislatures are up. And Arizona could get flipped in 2022. Florida could get flipped. Texas could get flipped. They can all become Democratic state legislatures and stop the nonsense with the voting. The voting is the real problem that we face now. Yeah. We can't solve anything else until we solve the voting problem.
I'm with you. Bob, thank you. And that's and the Supreme Court is starting to weigh in on this and putting their thumb on the Republican side of the scale, which is why I wrote this rant about the Supreme Court today. Bob, thank you. Brilliant.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Reading today from a book by Four Arrows, also known as Donald Jacobs or Don Jacobs. It's titled Point of Departure, Returning to Our More Authentic Worldview for Education and Survival. This is from Chapter 3, Community-Oriented Self-Authorship. Knowing the power of intentional and unintentional trance-based learning and how the latter can make us susceptible to believing untoward communication from authority figures, we can understand one reason self-authorship is important in the indigenous worldview. When we are in control of our thinking and trust our intuitive insights, our natural trance awareness helps prevent misdirection from external influences. It gives us the authority for what we can then instill in our minds to achieve. If someone such as a trusted shaman or psychologist has, certain skills at hypnosis, we might tentatively authorize him or her to help us form the most effective images, but we do so with full awareness. More important than avoiding negative influence from perceived authority figures, however, is the self-authorship via indigenous worldview that gives high degrees of individual autonomy to people while at the same time assuring that people use their freedoms to help their communities. In the indigenous worldview, the highest authority for all decisions comes from one's personal, honest reflection on lived experience, with the understanding that everything is related. It is this understanding that makes a distinction between self-authorship, as it is generally perceived in the dominant worldview, and that of the indigenous one. Self-authorship is always ultimately in the service of the greater good in the latter. Self-authorship in indigenous ways of thinking comes from knowing that the highest experience for decisions comes from honest reflection on lived experience in light of realizing that everything is related in life, and this interconnectedness must be a part of all decisions. Michael Anthony Hart gets to these ideas about inner authority coming from such reflection. Through inward exploration, tapping into creative forces that run through all life, individuals come to subjectively experience a sense of wholeness. This exploration is an experience in context, where the context is the self in connection with happenings, and the findings from such experience is knowledge. Happenings may be facilitated through rituals or ceremonies that incorporate dreaming, visioning, meditation, and prayer. The findings from such experiences are encoded in community praxis as a way of synthesizing knowledge derived from introspection. Hence, indigenous peoples' cultures recognize and affirm the spiritual through practical applications of inner space. Such a holistic understanding of accessing, trusting, and exercising our inner authority is the source of the creativity and knowledge synthesis we need for addressing our global problems. While Ehrman refers to this inner authority with the Cree term mamatawisin, which is the capacity to tap the creative life forces of the inner space by the use of all the faculties that consume our being. It is to exercise inwardness. This understanding is missing from our dominant worldview, where objective-based outward exploration is sought for guidance rather than introspective knowledge development. Dependence on external authority is the rule in spite of the call to question authority that has always resonated on the fringes. Under the dominant worldview, obedience trumps community-oriented self-authorship. Decision-making is rarely a holistic process, nor does it utilize alternative states of awareness, deep reflection, and community praxis. The random quotations below, selected from an internet search, reveal that obedience to authority is common under the dominant worldview. Obedience to lawful authority is the foundation of manly characteristics by Robert E. Lee. All religions have based morality on obedience, Alexander Herzen. Obedience brings peace in decision-making, James Faust. Justice is the insurance that we have on our lives and property. Obedience is the premium we pay for it, William Penn. I was not born to be free. I was born to adore and obey, C.S. Lewis. Every game has rules. Life's a game that has its respective rules. Obey the rules, win the game, Israel Ahavor. A wolf cannot have more than one head, or it tears itself apart, Con Iggulden. From a social dissident on the fringe, Noam Chomsky wrote, any dictator would admire the uniformity and obedience of the U.S. media. From an indigenous-raised Lakota, Oyesa, the American Indian was an individualist in religion as in war. Reliance on external authority is not only the bedrock of choices in mainstream society and the main approach to moral development, but it also gives guides jurisprudence and conflict resolution. Authorized punishment or revenge is a primary goal for wrongdoing. Under indigenous worldview, bringing offenders back into community via affected members of the community is the goal. This relational approach expands the circle of land and seeks input from the wide circle of relevant people. Spiritual resources are employed via prayer or song, and subjectivity is as important as objectivity. Hart emphasizes this relationship as emphasizing spirit and spirituality, and in turn, a sense of communitism and respectful individualism. And then he goes on about the indigenous worldview and how it relates to what we would call communism. Point of departure by 4 arrows.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So, as I mentioned in the previous hour, the Supreme Court is up to no good. In fact, the headline over at Alternet, as I recall, is the Supreme Court launches a political torpedo right at the Biden administration. Well, it turns out it's not just the Supreme Court. We watched for, 4 years while Mitch McConnell did nothing but pack the federal courts with right-wing crazies coming out of the Federalist Society. And here we are. On the line with us is our old buddy Greg Palast, the investigative journalist, the author of his most recent book, How Trump Stole 2020. GregPalast.com is his website. He's got a great newsletter. You need to subscribe to it there, and it's free. And also his Twitter handle is @Greg_Palast, P-A-L-A-S-T. Greg, welcome back. Tell us about this.
Well, in Colorado, you have a berserko judge, in other words, appointed by Trump, agree with Judicial Watch, the right-wing vote suppression hit squad of lawyers, using the National Voter Registration Act, which is supposed to protect voters, right? That's why the law was passed. And they're using the NVRA to sue the state of Colorado, and the judge went along with this so far, so giving them a trial, which will allow them to claim that they have to start purging the voter rolls of Colorado. Now, we've been through this purge game for a very long time. I've been studying it since, investigating since Catherine Harris purged black people back in 2000, 58,000 black men, and that elected George Bush. Well, it's rolled on and gotten more sophisticated, and they've taken it now to Colorado. And the judge says, yeah, we can have a trial to force the state to start purging the voter rolls. It's a complete phony. I mean, their evidence, and I can tell you, I used to teach statistics among the other crazy things I've done, and their so-called statistics are that, there are thousands of people on the voter rolls who are inactive and dead, and they've moved away. Well, you have these giant voters. Well, yeah, so what? But you haven't seen zombies walking into Colorado voter booths. We haven't seen Canadians marching in on their mooses. We haven't seen people voting from prisons. But so there's no evidence, absolutely zero, none, of a single, not even one. They couldn't produce a single fraudulent vote. But they're saying, well, could be, and the judge is going along with it. Very, very dangerous stuff.
Is this, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, Greg, but Colorado has a Democratic governor and a Democratic Secretary of State. How is this happening?
Because you have a Trump judge, so that's why they're suing, because they're trying to
letting the legislature do this. I mean,
what he's saying is that they're suing to force the Democratic Secretary of State Griswold,
right,
to begin purging the voter rolls of Colorado. Now, they're very sharp at this, Judicial Watch. They've done this successfully, by the way, in Pennsylvania, the key swing state. And what they're trying to do is force the state to join a program called ERIC, which is we've investigated ERIC for the, when I say we, the Palast investigative team and experts have gone through the ERIC list in the state of Wisconsin for Black Voters Matter. We found that about a third of the list is made up completely of students and black people who are legal voters, but they're on this hit list as movers. You move your dorm room from one building to another, and they say, oh, you're a ghost voter, or you've left the state. This is what they're trying to do. They did it in Pennsylvania. That's why Pennsylvania was close, because they removed a lot of people who should not have been removed. Georgia's just adopted this system. Florida's just adopted this system. Pennsylvania's adopted this system. And now they want to force through a Trump judge.
So is ERIC the new interstate cross-check, or only it's state-specific? It's just being done state by state rather than some sort of national list that Chris Kansas Kobach came up with?
Well, this is son of interstate cross-check. Our campaign really defeated interstate cross-check. It's dead. It's done. Mm-hmm. And but out of the crypt came this new son of cross-check, ERIC, which they're trying to impose on Colorado. Now, again, you have a legislature and a Senate. You have a Democratic governor, Democratic Secretary of State, who are saying we're not going along with this nonsense. But you have a court misusing a voter protection law to remove protections from
right. That law in 1993 is sometimes referred to as the Motor Voter Act. That was the one that required states to allow people to register to vote when they get the driver's license. It also is the only law on the books that both in its preamble and in the black letter law of, black letter part of the law itself, says that all American citizens have a right to vote. I mean, that literally, that language is in there. And for some reason, the Supreme Court, and that was 1993, as I recall, and for some reason, the Supreme Court completely ignored that in the Bush v. Gore decision when they ruled that if the Florida recount was actually conducted, it would cause irreparable harm to plaintiff George W. Bush.
Well, yeah, it would have. If you counted all the votes in Florida, it would have irreparably harmed non-President Bush.
Right.
So, yes, so what they're doing is, you're correct. The law, which seems to be erased in an Orwellian manner by this federal judge, a law that's supposed to protect voters, is being used to force the purging of voters. And I have to tell you, because I have the law virtually memorized, that the law specifically says you do not have to purge voters from the voter rolls. It says that the voter rolls must be accurate. Now, that doesn't mean that you start removing students and African Americans and in Colorado Hispanics. Look, the last time that there was a Colorado Republican as Secretary of State, they removed 50,000 people who were ex-cons. They said, well, we're going to remove all the ex-cons from the voter rolls. But guess what? Colorado doesn't have any law which prohibits ex-cons from voting. But they removed 50,000 people.
Oh, geez.
So this is the game that they're playing.
So it's, the apocryphal statement from Joe Stalin, and I've never been able to find an actual source of him saying this.
Oh, I know what you're going to say, and he really said it.
Okay.
Who counts the votes?
Yeah,
he really said it.
I don't care who votes. What matters to me is who counts the votes. And
that's correct.
And in this case, I don't care who registers to vote or tries to vote. I just care who's on the legal voting roll, because I can give provisional ballots to people who aren't on those rolls. They'll think that they voted, their vote will never get counted, and we get to win elections.
That's right. So it's the abuse of laws that were meant to protect voters, like we were mentioning, for example, the provisional ballots, of which there were about 2.7 million in the last election, or a little less. And about 1 million were not counted, mostly cast by African Americans. The provisional ballot was created to protect voters who were wrongly removed from the rolls. Instead, it's been used as basically a dumpster when black voters come in, and especially young black males from the statistics, and Asian American young males are handed provisional ballots, and then they don't get counted on all kinds of cockamamie grounds. So it's an abuse of the language of voting rights bills. I'm very concerned, by the way. I'm going to be very honest with you, Tom, and a lot of people don't like to hear this, but there's a lot of dangers in the For the People Act. John Lewis Act would stop this Judicial Watch hit job on Colorado in its tracks. The John Lewis law would restore the Voting Rights Act and allow the Justice Department to say, come on, you can't get away with this. We have to pre-clear it, and that means that we have to review this. And it's
looking increasingly like if one of those two pieces of legislation is going to pass, it's not going to be the For the People Act. There's just, Manchin and Sinema have dug their heels in. It would probably be that John Lewis Voting Rights Act.
Well, I hope we get the Lewis Act, because what it does is it restores the Voting Rights Act and puts some real juice into it. That's where we should be putting our efforts into the John Lewis Act. It would stop this case in its tracks, assuming that our Attorney General will be doing his job. I know that we've got a terrific new Civil Rights Division at the Justice Department, which, until a year ago was the Injustice Department. It's not all bad news, though. I should mention that we just won a big case in North Carolina for voting rights, in which the court there said that you cannot require ex-cons to pay a bunch of fines and court costs that you can't even know what they are in order to vote. So that was the we've had. I don't want to say it's all grim. Let's not go there.
Yeah, although they have stacked the courts so thoroughly that they're doing their very best. You can read all about it at gregpalast.com, and you can discuss it online with Greg at Greg_Palast on Twitter. Greg, it is always great talking with you. Keep up the great work, and the extraordinary work that the Palast Investigative Fund is doing is so worth people's support. Thank you for dropping by.
You're the best, Tom. Thanks.
Back at you, Greg. Always great talking with you. We will be back. It's 15 minutes, coming up on 16 minutes past the hour.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Back with more of the news of the day and your calls in just a moment. Also want to get into Ron DeSantis. He's winning the pandemic. I'll tell you about that in 5 minutes. And welcome back. Susan in Decatur, Georgia. Hey, Susan, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom, how are you?
I'm well. What's up?
I've been trying to call you for 2 weeks, but I'm homeschooling for the second year, a 9th grader and a 4th grader.
Oh, my.
But 2 weeks ago on a Monday, you made the comment on one of your rants that America is a failed state. But on top of that, I'd like to add that America is a third world country wrapped in a bootleg Gucci belt bought on a 22% interest credit card funded by China. We are a huge failure.
We've got a lot of upsides, Susan, but broadly speaking, I can't disagree with your analysis, sadly.
I want to also say that the situation here in Georgia is actually beyond dire. That there's an article on the HAC from last Thursday.
It's the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, the newspaper,
yes,
the statewide newspaper.
Yes, and it says, on Thursday, it says, I can't remember the title. I didn't copy the title. But anyway, it says Georgia Public Health Commissioner Dr. Kathleen Toomey is recommending that students be required to wear masks when quarantining in school as a safety precaution to curb the spread of COVID. Toomey made the recommendation in a letter to state representatives Thursday. The advice comes 2 weeks after the agency issued an order allowing schools to establish their own quarantine rules for students exposed to the virus.
So let me get this straight, Susan. What you're saying is that in Georgia public schools right now, if a kid is known to have been exposed to the virus and therefore probably or possibly contagious, you're contagious for about 4 days before you show symptoms, highly contagious, in fact, with the Delta variant, that child has the option of not wearing a mask while in quarantine? Is that what you're telling me?
Not only in quarantine, but they are allowing the schools, if the school says, well, yes, my child is positive, or yes, my child has been in contact with a positive student, but I demand that my child be allowed to go to school, and I'm an anti-masker, so they can't wear a mask.
So they not only don't go into quarantine, they're sitting in the classroom, quote, in quarantine right next to all the other kids with no mask on.
Yes, sir.
Is that it? So,
yes, sir.
So the whole quarantine thing is just a label. It's not actually a physical place to which they relocate these kids.
It's fake. So if you know that Georgia Governor Kemp is just like death sentence DeSantis, I'm sure that it's going on in other red states. They're all playing the same game.
Oh, yeah. Tate Reeves is doing this in Mississippi, too.
Well, and on top of all that, right now they're running ads 24/7 on all media in Georgia that if you will please work as a bus driver, because they are missing 60% of their bus drivers.
Because they're out sick? Or because they're scared?
Because they've either been out sick, they've died from COVID last year, they're scared to death, they're not vaccinating, whatever the issues are, right?
Right.
But the other week, when you made that statement the same week about America as a failed state, there was another guy that called that said that America is dismantling the education system. And what better way to dismantle it than not be able to provide the poor people a ride to school?
Well, this was, we had the person on from the Independent Women's Forum who was going on and on about how, teachers need to be exposed to kids without masks. Why? Well, I think they're trying to destroy our public schools. I really do. This is Betsy DeVos's agenda. Susan, thank you. Thank you for the heads up. Hey, thanks so much for sharing our program and for reaching out to our stations and sponsors and letting them know that you're listening. It really means a lot to us. So we have over at HartmanReport.com my daily rant, which you can find there. And over at ThomHartmann.com, we have the free newsletter, which lists every single website, gives you hot links right out to every single website for every single story that I talk about throughout the program during the course of the day. And then, of course, also at ThomHartmann.com, we've got our weekly video that we put up. And the one this week is kind of mind-boggling. It turns out, if you remember back when Anthony Kennedy resigned from the U.S. Supreme Court right after Trump made remarks about his son Justin, who had signed off on $1 billion worth of loans from Deutsche Bank to Donald Trump, Kennedy resigned, and Brett Kavanaugh was nominated by Trump. And Christine Blasey Ford said he was, essentially guilty of sexual assault. All kinds of tips went to the FBI, and we have just found out what happened to those tips. It's all over at ThomHartmann.com. And it's 21 minutes past the hour. Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And I wanted to point out to you that Ron DeSantis seems to be winning the competition. Hey, not bad, right? This is the graphic over at Democratic Underground today, their pick of the moment. Ron DeSantis is winning the pandemic. At the height of the pandemic last year, the average number of Floridians dying of COVID peaked at 185 a day. A year later, with effective vaccines freely available, Florida's daily death rate just topped 200 for the first time and now stands at a record 228 a day. According to Yahoo News, quote, This makes DeSantis the first and so far only governor in the U.S. whose state is now recording more COVID-19 deaths each day than during the previous wave of the virus. 228 people a day dying in Florida. That's more than three. This is according to Yahoo News. That's more than 3 times the number of people dying every day in California, a state with twice as many people. So Florida, with half as many people as California, has twice as many deaths, which I think comes out to 4 times more deaths per person, right? Florida is winning the competition. And here, this story from Winter Garden, Florida, Dateline Winter Garden. This is WFLA.com. And a West Side crematory in Winter, this is, where they cremate bodies. In Winter Garden, they're overwhelmed with the remains of people who need to be cremated. There's an influx of bodies like they've never seen, worse than the first wave of COVID. The area where bodies are stored prior to being cremated is stacked to the ceiling with dead bodies. The staff is working day and night to honor the dead. WESH2 called 20 funeral homes and crematoriums, and many were too busy to even be part of our story. Some were even too busy to talk on the phone. One funeral director said that in a 30-minute period where he talked to his partner, 4 new cases came in. A death care industry, this is the funeral industry, struggling to meet demands at a level they've never seen before, and families struggling to cope with grief at a level the community has never seen before. Meanwhile, Delta Airlines has now notified their employees. United said everybody's got to get vaccinated within the next month or so. Everybody. Delta, we're not going to force people to get vaccinated, but if you're not vaccinated, your health insurance costs just went up $200 a month. Starting on September 12th, unvaccinated employees will also have to take a COVID test every week. So $200 a month plus once a week, this swab goes up your nose, buddy. The CEO, Ed Bastian, the CEO of Delta Airlines, he said, quote, the average hospital stay for COVID-19 has cost Delta $50,000 per person. And so he's talking about this $200 a month surcharge. He says this surcharge will be necessary to address the financial risk the decision to not vaccinate is creating for our company. All Delta employees who have been hospitalized with COVID were not fully vaccinated, 100% of them. He's also saying that, by the way, if you get sick with COVID, if you are vaccinated, no problem. Wait until you're better, you can come back to work, and we'll continue your pay. But if you're not vaccinated and you get sick with COVID, you're going to have to burn through your sick days. That seems like a reasonable thing. But right now, what we've got is Florida winning the war. Meanwhile, the Obama administration is doing some really good stuff. Right now, David Rothkopf tweeting, right now the administration is conducting a massive operation in Kabul that has resulted in the evacuation of 50,000 people in 8 days. It's overseeing a life and death battle against COVID. In fact, it's over President Biden yesterday said it's over 75,000 people have been evacuated from Afghanistan just in the last couple of weeks since Trump screwed this whole thing all up. And then he goes on to point, Rothkopf goes on to point, the Biden administration is overseeing a life and death battle against COVID that has already resulted in over 200 million Americans receiving the vaccine. It's also in the midst of negotiations in support of the package of a vitally needed $1 trillion infrastructure bill, the largest in decades. Last night, the Vice President of the United States, Kamala Harris, gave a stirring and effective speech in Asia, underscoring our resolve to stand up to China. The Department of Justice is working on hundreds of cases related to the attempted coup against the United States. The DOJ has made it a priority to combat a nationwide voter suppression campaign by the Republican Party. Elsewhere, the government has launched an unprecedented campaign to battle climate change. At the same time, the Biden administration is trying to undo the damage done by their predecessors at the southern border, and the vice president has been involved in seeking to restore programs that would reduce migrant flows from their sources in Central America. I mean, good stuff is going on.
The Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
Mitch McConnell is still trying to block even judicial appointments, even appointments to the cabinet positions in the Senate. But nonetheless, Democrats are getting things done.
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is Richard Wolff's Understanding Socialism. This is from the introduction. Socialism is a kind of yearning for a better life than what capitalism permits for most people. Socialist yearnings are as old as capitalism itself because they are its products. Where and when capitalism's problems and failings have accumulated criticism and critics, socialist voices have arisen. And so it is again now. Any serious discussion of socialism must begin by acknowledging socialism's rich diversity. Whatever particular aspect of socialism we choose to analyze, they need to be located within socialism's complexity. That avoids presenting one's own interpretation as if it were the entirety of socialism. In this book, I focus on the economic aspects of socialism, how it differs from capitalism in broad outlines. I'm more interested in socialist critiques of capitalism and their implications about socialist alternatives than in the particulars of the few early experiments in erecting socialist systems, USSR, People's Republic of China, and so on, that history so far offers. Finally, my own education and work constrain me to concentrate on Western Europe and North America. Some important aspects of socialism are thus not covered or discussed here. Yearnings for better lives, such as socialism proposes, are not new. In slave societies, the slaves hoped and dreamed of lives less hard and less out of their own control. Their yearning aimed to obtain freedom. They sought social change that would preclude any one person being the property of another. In feudal societies, the serfs, free in the sense that no one owned them, yearned for better lives too. Their subordination to lords included heavy labor and other burdens that they wanted lifted. They hoped and dreamed of a society in which they would not be bound to the land, the lord of that land, and the feudal dues of labor and subservience. The serfs mobilized in the 1789 French Revolution to demand liberty, equality, and brotherhood. In effect, the serfs had expanded on what the slaves had called freedom. In the American Revolution against British King George III, the revolutionaries were neither slaves nor serfs. They were mostly self-employed farmers, craftspeople, and merchants subject to a foreign feudal kingdom. They wanted liberty as individuals to pursue their dreams without hindrance from feudalism or monarchism, whether foreign or domestic. They added democracy to the goals advanced by the slaves and serfs before them. The different systems of slavery, feudalism, and small-scale self-employment produced masses of people yearning for better lives. Eventually, each of those systems provoked revolutions. Many people then sought to break away from and go beyond those systems. The French and American revolutions marked key moments in the social transformations of major pre-capitalist systems into capitalist ones. By capitalist system, we mean that particular organization of production in which the basic human relation is employer-employee instead of master-slave, lord-serf, or individual self-employment. The revolutionaries who wanted and built capitalism hoped and believed the transition to employer-employee relations of production would bring with them the liberty, equality, brotherhood, and democracy they had yearned for. The revolution's leaders promised to themselves and to the people they led that those goals would be achieved. But the transition to capitalist employer-employee relations that increasingly replaced the previous slave, feudal, and self-employment relations of production had unintended consequences. Capitalism soon proved to be different from what its revolutionaries had hoped. While it enabled some people to be more free and more independent than slaves, serf, or self-employed subjects of monarchies had been, it also seriously limited freedom, independence, and democracy for many. Capitalism betrayed many of the promises made by its advocates. It produced and reproduced great inequalities of income and wealth. Poverty proved to be as endemic as capitalism seemed equally adept at producing and reproducing both wealth and poverty. The capitalist rich used their wealth to shape and control politics and culture. Democratic forms hid very undemocratic content. The cyclical instability attending capitalism constantly threatened and hurt large numbers of people, and so on. Growing numbers of employees within capitalism began to yearn for better lives. They defined those yearnings first in the familiar terms of the earlier French and American revolutions: equality, fraternity, liberty, and democracy. They criticized a capitalism that failed to deliver those to most people and demanded social changes to achieve them. Many people still continue to want a better, softer, friendlier capitalism, where government regulates and intervenes to achieve more of what the French and American revolutionaries had yearned for and promised. They are also often self-defined as socialists. However, capitalism's development provoked another, different perspective that also called itself socialism. In that view, capitalism had not broken from slavery, feudalism, and monarchy nearly as much as its advocates had imagined. Slavery had masters' slaves, feudalism had lords' serfs, and monarchy had kings' subjects as their key sources of their inequalities, lack of freedom, oppressions, and conflicts. The employer-employee relation of production and capitalism generated parallel problems. Capitalism installed monarchies inside individual workplaces, even as monarchies outside workplaces were rejected. Kings mostly disappeared, but inside workplaces, the owners or their designated boards of directors assumed king-like powers. The book Understanding Socialism by Richard Wolff.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So Rand Paul is now echoing Louis Gohmert. Remember Louis Gohmert back in the day, back in the after 9/11, when he was talking about terror babies. There's Muslims coming to the United States to have babies who will be citizens, and we can't kick them out anymore, and then they're going to grow up and they're going to be terrorists. Yeah, and we all kind of laughed at Louis Gohmert. So now Rand Paul is talking about how the Biden administration is taking kids from down at the border who may have it, COVID, and they're plucking them up and putting them all over the United States as if they're wishing to seed the country with a new variant. Right. But that's not half of it. Then he goes on to say that, for him, quote, the bottom line for those who are saying I won't go to a restaurant unless everybody's vaccinated, he says, mind your own business. Well, Rand, it is our business. Public health is all of our businesses. I've got a whole new rant about Rand Paul's bizarre take on the public good over at ThomHartmann.com. It's a video. You can check it out there. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. We've got a lot on the table here. The right-wing websites, by the way. This is from the Writing newsletter, the THERIGHTING.com. Top news headlines from the far right for the rest of us. From DonaldJTrump.com. How many terrorists will Biden bring to America? Right. See, it was Trump who actually shut down for 2 years the special immigrant visa program so that people who had worked with our troops in Afghanistan, who we had promised, you give us a couple of years of your life, we'll get you out of the country. We made this promise to them. And then, Stephen Miller said, hey, wait a minute, those people are not, they don't look like white Europeans. And Trump was like, oh my God, brown people coming to America, and they shut the program down. And this is what Biden inherited, a totally broken program. So Trump says, how many terrorists will Biden bring to America? The Washington Free Beacon, DHS braces for terror threat from southern border. There has never been a terrorist attack from the southern border. James Polk claimed there was one in 1847, 48? Yes, Mexico has invaded America, and we got the Mexican-American War out of that, but he lied. Abraham Lincoln called him out on that lie. He was arguably the first president to lie us into an unnecessary war. It was James Polk in the Mexican-American War. Of course, we did get Arizona, New Mexico, and the southern part of California out of that. But hey, it wasn't right. American greatness. On terrorism, Biden is either dishonest or delusional. Front page, another website from the right wing. Biden's gift to global jihadis, a safe national homeland. Newsmax, Biden administration must be held accountable on Afghanistan. Washington Examiner. This is interesting. Trump set the stage for Biden's Afghanistan debacle. At least one source on the right gets this right. But I think the Babylon Sisters headline over at Democratic Underground really summarizes it best. Republicans silent as Biden gets 21,600 people out of Afghanistan in one single day. It's amazing. We're over 75,000 evacuees. And the Republicans, what do they have to say? He's not doing it right. He's not doing it fast enough. And oh, my God, he's bringing brown people there. Oh, God. Bobby in La Puente, California. Hey, Bobby, you wanted to get back to our first hour topic of dealing with the trauma of wildfires and global warming and COVID and an insane president for 4 years. And,
Nazism.
Yeah,
yes,
Nazism.
the Nazis on the street.
There you go.
Look, how do I cope with it, Tom? I wake up in the morning, thy will be done. Keep me from my will. Because if I take the will, I'll mess it up. So I do that. I have to humble myself. I'm not a prayer, but I had to learn. Okay? I'm alive. Like you lost a best friend, I lost my brother, what was it, November 3rd, the last remaining. So I don't get to talk to him anymore. So, okay, how do I deal with it? Divorce from self-pity. Gratefulness. I write a grateful list. What am I grateful for? I got a home that's paid. I got a pension coming in. Okay, we got a mega gap insurance thanks to you, Tom. Me and my wife retired, so there's a lot to be grateful. But for the people struggling, I pray. I don't know if it means anything, but it comes from my heart. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
When you feel that humble, like you, hugging your wife, wow, it means something to me. Then I look at my wife. If it wasn't for my wife, I wouldn't be here.
Same here. Honest to God, hey. Same here. Bobby, the nature of my prayers has changed in the last year or so, and I've really noticed it. And I think it's because of all the social distancing. But I'm finding that there are two things I'm doing a lot more of than I ever did before. One is specifically, and even during times that are not like I'm sitting down to say a prayer, just looking at the world and acknowledging what a gift it is to be alive. How much I know that my mother or father, who are no longer with us, what they would give for just 1 minute to be able to breathe this air and see this world, and just, being so grateful for being alive and expressing that gratitude. But the other thing is, I've been going through lists of people, and some of them people I haven't seen in years, but they'll just pop into my head, and I've got a list of friends, I've got a list of people who are my opponents, as it were, even political people. And all the people who work on this program, I literally go through this list every day now and imagine the faces of these people. I have no idea if, Christian Science is right and I'm actually sending energy to those people that's helping them and healing them. But what I can tell you is that, and particularly with, old friends, we have some friends from Vermont that we haven't seen physically in years. I mean, we still talk to them maybe every other month on the phone, but haven't seen them in years. And I go through the family, the mom and dad and all three kids and visualize them. And what it's doing for me is it's making me feel like I'm still in touch with these people. Now, they have no idea that I'm even thinking of them. But doing this every day seems to be, if it's not spiritual or if there's not some sort of magical energy going back and forth between me and them, at the very least, I'm feeling like I'm in touch with people that I'm physically out of touch with. I think it's therapeutic, if nothing else. What do you think?
It is. When you think of people, my wife taught me that's a prayer. When you think of somebody you haven't for a long time, that's a prayer, honoring their memory.
Yep.
Fred Gratz, I wish you would have met this guy, an engineer next to me. Right? Mechanical, got me to graduate drafting, but I didn't like it. A wonderful man, and I think of the time I could have spent with him. Bob, you can still go to school. If he was alive, Tom, Bob, it's not too late. He'd be 130. It's not too late to get educated. And I think of like yourself. To me, you're like a brother. The same month, 3 brothers. Yours is still alive, and I bless you for that. But what got me when you shared on the air, you apologize for your whiteness or white privilege. And you don't know what it done to me. Like, wow, I can believe in somebody. You have a good heart. Your callers as well. You don't know how much the show means to me. Even got my granddaughter, 8 years old, reading to me because she lacked in reading. You know, lazy, like to play, but good at math. Papa, I'm going to read to you. Man, I am blessed, Tom. I shouldn't be alive. And I feel that, no, that's self-pity. So I'm on a journey. What I'm doing now is grieving my family. I haven't had time because I grew up in PTSD. And to me, okay, I isolate, no big deal. I used to do it. But now, you know, I exercise. I go in the garden. You got me motivated. Even though I'm disabled, I was a gym rat, pumping iron, 400 bench press, all this baloney for what? And now the garden, walking out to my granddaughter, look, Papa, a spider. She's not you know what I mean? Exploring. It's a gift. I didn't share it with my daughters, you know, my first clan, because I had alcoholism. But I do have to admit, I do smoke cannabis because I have to have something because of the damage I had, you know, growing up. So I don't abuse it. Alcohol is the furthest thing from my mind.
Yeah.
If I have to call somebody, I have a couple of people that will pull my covers, or I'll pull them. You know, we help each other.
Yep.
You know, reach out to somebody, either call or somebody. Listen.
Yep. There's a lot of good stuff there. There's a lot of good stuff there. Bobby, thank you.
Bless you and your family. Thank you.
And back at you, Bobby. You know, I send you all the light and love I can. Bobby, thank you very much. In fact, I frequently, in my prayers, you know, you're not supposed to talk about what you do. You know, what was Jesus in Matthew? He said in the Sermon on the Mount, go in your closet and pray in secret. Don't talk about it in public, because then it doesn't work anymore. So I'm going to stop right there. Lisa in San Francisco. Hey, Lisa, what's on your mind?
Hi, Tom. Oh, I love Bobby. I wanted to also tell you how I'm coping. I've been on my walks collecting rocks, and I bring them home, and I have paint pens, and I paint happy faces on them, and then I redistribute them in my neighborhood.
Oh, how sweet.
And I'm on the first floor, so I can often hear people walking by talking about them. I don't know if it brings them more joy or me, but it's a simple little thing, and I'm taking a walk anyway, so I figure I'll just do that. And I'm drawing on them right now, and drawing the faces makes me feel good, and then when I put them out there, makes me feel good. It's simple, and it's not really anything, but it's something.
You're bringing light to your neighborhood. That is wonderful, Lisa. That is so sweet. Bringing light to your neighborhood. Lisa, thank you.
It's a San Francisco thing.
Yeah, indeed, I guess. But it could be, you know, anybody could do that. It could be a national thing. Lisa, thank you.
For sure.
So nice to hear from you, and thank you again for watching us on Free Speech TV. It's 45 minutes past the hour. Back with more of your calls in just a moment. It's the Thom Hartmann Program.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann. Visit ThomHartmann.com for audio and video archives.
Taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, right here. We'll be right back. And welcome back. Virginia in Gettysburg, Pennsylvania. Hey, Virginia, what's on your mind today?
Hi. I really appreciate you. You keep me sane.
Thank you.
All the things that people have said, I use. But I also go to what I call the root issue, which is centering in your inner spiritual identity and identifying there, not politically, not externally, not by your wealth, not by the terrible times or the good times. But you have this inner strength despite any circumstances or difficult times. And I just found something online, and I'll quote it if it's all right.
Sure. If it's brief.
It's from Sound Healing, Beloved Come Home, May Lan. There is a place of stillness within you that is wise, aware, present, perceptive, grounded, and trusting. This is the true core of your being, hidden beneath layers of the hurt this world has wrapped around you. The remembrance of who you are to your inner peace in the light of your soul's essence. Breathe in, breathe out. You have arrived to welcome home. Yeah. It's many religions, including Buddhism, Lao Tzu, even Christianity, reborn to the Spirit. It's a spiritual awakening to your true self, so you don't have to find external worth by comparison, wealth, power. This is where all the Republicans are trapped. They're looking for themselves outside themselves. They're looking for their self-worth outside themselves by competition, by exploitation.
And money.
And money, and all this excess greed uses up the planet. This all fits together like a perfect jigsaw puzzle. I use Tai Chi. I have a garden. I have an organic garden. I help the pollinators. I go out in the morning. I listen to a certain aria by Sarah Brightman called Canto della Terra, and I greet the sun. I understand your wonder and appreciation at the amazing world we live in. And I was just talking, I'm a home care aide. I come through the gate. There's one woman there, and she is saying, everybody's coming through complaining about the heat and this and that. They complain all day to me. And I said, yes, they're focused on the negative, and it blocks all their ability to receive all the beauty and happiness in the world. It's just like a wall they put around, and it's like Trump's bubble. And Trump is caught in this whole externalized comparative self-worth. Where he has to be richer, and he has to step on other people because he sees them a competition. Once you find your real self, none of this will disturb you. You don't care what people think of you. You don't care about if you're better or worse. You just know we're all here on a journey back to our true selves, right, and shedding all of this externalized wounding and competition and tiny little wars between neighbors, friends, people, tribes, other nations. It all comes from one problem.
Yeah.
So,
the saying at funerals is, "Dust thou art, to dust returnest." I think it's light thou art, to light returnest. I think we came from the light, we return to the light, and part of our job here is to express the light.
I think it's the main job.
Yeah.
People get stuck on the wrong path.
There you go. Virginia, thank you. Thank you very much. We'll be right back.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
So we've got a new video up about the Senate Leadership Fund and the Congressional Leadership Fund, the SLF and the CLF. Nice, innocent-sounding names, right? Leadership funds and Senate and Congress, but they're Republican super PACs that are taking millions and millions of dollars from fossil fuel and other dirty industries and from right-wing billionaires and recycling that money directly into the campaigns. In fact, in several cases, actually running on-the-ground get-out-the-vote efforts for Republican members of Congress, running the entire television operation for some of these members of Congress. Lauren Boebert received over $900,000 from the Congressional Leadership Fund so that she could take the 3rd District of Colorado. It's an amazing story. They spent $437 million just in the last election. This is poisoning this money, poisoning our democracy. It's all over at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Trish in Kent, Washington. Hey, Trish, what's up?
Hi. I wanted to talk about some of the things I do to cope, and one of the things that's been very rewarding is I write to some of my grandchildren. I write letters. And one of my granddaughters is quite good at writing, and she really enjoys it. And I realize I feel closer to her than I do to even some of the other ones that I still see or
Isn't that sweet? Are you doing this by email, Trish, or by physical mail?
No, physical letters.
Yeah. I have a friend.
And they love getting something in the mail like that.
Yeah, I have a friend, Alex, I shouldn't give his whole name. He's an old producer with NPR. In fact, that's how I met him 30 years ago. And we send physical letters back and forth. And it's a hoot. And he sends me these long letters, and I respond with typically shorter letters, but handwritten letters.
Yeah, it's very rewarding. Plus, I spend a lot of time outdoors. I garden, and I also walk a lot. Yeah. And I've given up my car, so I have to walk if I need to go anywhere, and it's good.
It really is.
That all helps.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Trish, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story with us. It's much appreciated. Jerry in Baltimore, Maryland. Jerry, you're on the air.
Hi, Tom.
Hey.
I wanted to talk about the PTSD you're talking about. And I really think that one of the reasons it's so bad right now in the country, it's not just the COVID, it's not just the insanity we see in Afghanistan and all the other things you mentioned. I think it's a lack of the accountability of all the criminal activity is causing additional stress in our lives because we don't see any justice. And what we do see is very uneven. And we don't understand why, like you were talking yesterday about how the African Americans were being treated so differently in their sentencing from Black Lives Matter. All the protesters who were, not guilty of anything anywhere near as horrific, it's unforgivable crimes, I feel like, at the Capitol. So I was thinking that a problem is the PTSD is because there is no accountability. And I think that adds a lot of stress. But what I wanted to say is how we worked on it as a neighborhood. We all worked on the campaigns, almost everybody on my street. It's a very blue area in Baltimore here. And what we ended up doing was we went and decided to do a sanctuary for birds, butterflies, and bees. So we all got together and we did a landscaping design. So all the houses are coordinating. Like I put in a 700 square foot butterfly garden. Mm-hmm. And I'm also putting in a grove of trees. And my neighbors are all doing the same thing. And we're all working. Like one of my neighbors is even raising tiger swallowtail butterflies. She usually releases a dozen or more a week.
Whoa.
And we're all like doing different things together. Like we even have the exact kind of trees in order to bring certain species of butterflies because of the larva has to have a certain type of leaf.
Sure.
And it's just interesting because we've all worked together as a group and we've all put together also a way to make it deer friendly because we have a real deer issue here. I had like 5 deer in my yard the other day. Oh. So we're all trying to keep our plants alive for the bees, bring back the bees. It's tough in the garden when the deer eat everything in sight. Right. It killed my hospice for one thing. But I was going to say, working as a group, we sort of coordinated the entire 6 houses. Now all of us have a way to protect the very at-risk species, the butterflies, lots of other insects. But we are really sad because we've noticed we've lost a lot of our birds. So I'm building, like I said, an entire bird sanctuary in the back with some of my neighbors.
Yeah.
Whatever we can do I think it's just very therapeutic because the day-to-day insanity, and you're talking about prayers and praying on a daily basis.
Yeah.
One of my prayers I put in every day is that every Democratic senator and Democratic congressman is doing well and survives.
Yeah.
Because I'm terrified of losing the Senate. That's one of the things that gives me insomnia at night, to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
I want them to get these things passed while we still have the Senate. That's one of my biggest worries.
Yeah, I share that concern, and I confess that I don't know if anybody's listening, but I do when I pray. But I do believe that energy is happening. That the entire universe is made of energy, and that our thoughts are energy, and our prayers are energy. So there's something there, whether it's some imaginary Bronze Age figure from 3,000 years ago.
No, I agree with you. And my friend made a point to me, my friend Linda. She told me that just put out those positive messages. Even if you're trying to change it and it might seem like the negative, if you put it in a positive, it just comes out much better.
Yeah.
Like you say, you don't want Trump to win. You say, no, I want Joe Biden to succeed or whatever. You know what I mean?
There you go. Yeah.
That's what I've been trying to do, put it in a positive term.
Sending good energy. We've got to be doing that, sending good energy. Jerry,
Yes,
thank you for the call.
We sure need a lot of it right now.
That is so
Thank you,
spectacular that you've been able to pull together 5 neighbors and the 6 of you are all doing butterfly sanctuaries and things. It's just spectacular. You know, they sell seeds specifically for butterfly sanctuaries. You can find them. It's just great. Jerry, thank you so much. We'll be back. Stick around.
You're listening to Thom Hartmann.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at HelloFresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!
Our book today in the Thom Hartmann Book Club is The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff, with a foreword by Richard Clark. This is from the foreword. For some Americans, George W. Bush looks good by comparison to the incumbent, Donald Trump. In his post-presidency, Bush has devoted himself to worthy causes and acted in a bipartisan manner. The 43rd president should, however, be judged not by comparison to America's worst president, nor by what Bush may have done after leaving office. He should be evaluated for his actions in office, his nonfeasance, misfeasance, and malfeasance. This volume from Stephen Markoff provides the evidence for such an evaluation. You can judge for yourself. For me, there is little doubt. I, unfortunately, witnessed Bush and his administration make many of their most cataclysmic decisions. I was in the room when some of them occurred. When in December 2000, the Supreme Court of the United States decided on a 5-4 vote that George W. Bush should become the 43rd president, I was the Special Assistant to the President for National Security and National Coordinator for Security and Counterterrorism for President William J. Clinton. I anticipated leaving the White House on January 20th, 2001, when the Clinton presidency ended. However, I was asked by the incoming administration to stay on for an unspecified period because, as it was explained to me, there was no one on Bush's incoming team who knew much about terrorism or who wanted my job. Departing Clinton administration officials stressed to the newly arriving Bush team and to Bush himself the importance and urgency of dealing with the al-Qaeda terrorist threat. Indeed, the Clinton administration had developed an extensive series of further steps to combat al-Qaeda that it would have taken had it continued in office, or indeed had Vice President Al Gore assumed office in 2001. Within days of Bush's inauguration, I asked for an urgent meeting at the cabinet level to review both the threat and the plan to ratchet up the measures against al-Qaeda. No such meeting occurred until a week before 9/11, and that meeting was inconclusive. From January 2001 through the second week in September, Bush personally received frequent intelligence warnings that al-Qaeda posed an imminent threat. He convened no meetings to address the issue. His inner circle of national security advisors did nothing, despite frequent urgings by the CIA director and the national coordinator, including such vivid imagery as our asking in writing that they consider a near future in which there would be hundreds of dead bodies in the streets of America. Instead, they focused on Iraq and the regime of Saddam Hussein. Bush's nonfeasance cost American lives. Following the deaths of over 3,000 innocent civilians on 9/11, the Bush administration attempted to tie the al-Qaeda attack to Iraq, which had nothing to do with it. Despite CIA and FBI analyses that reiterated Iraq's non-involvement, the Bush administration almost immediately followed the 9/11 attack by beginning to make plans to invade Iraq. Senior Bush officials spoke privately of the need to demonstrate our strength in the wake of the 9/11 attack, show our might by destroying the largest army in the Middle East, and thereby also prove our willingness to take U.S. military casualties to achieve our ends. Prior to 9/11, foreign terrorists who had attacked Americans had been successfully sought out throughout the world and arrested by U.S. law enforcement authorities, assisted by the intelligence community. Many terrorists had been returned to U.S. territory, given their Miranda rights, provided with counsel, tried in our civilian criminal courts, convicted, sentenced, and incarcerated in maximum security prison cells. One, tried by the Commonwealth of Virginia, was executed. Despite this record, the Bush administration abandoned criminal process and established its own extrajudicial system for dealing with terrorists post 9/11. That new system used techniques that any objective observer would judge were torture. Perhaps the most well-known torture technique was the procedure known as waterboarding. The United States government had tried World War II Japanese military personnel for using the exact same technique. They were found guilty, and some were executed by hanging. The United States Senate's Committee on Intelligence conducted the most extensive oversight and investigation and examination in its history on the issue of torture during the Bush administration. That voluminous study concluded that torture was employed and that it had not, despite administration claims to the contrary, uniquely revealed information that had prevented terrorist attacks. To the contrary, it showed that tortured prisoners, unable to satisfy their interrogators with information that the terrorists did not know, instead guessed at what kind of story would stop the torture and then fabricated information of the kind they thought their prosecutors wanted to hear. Bush was not only aware of the torture, he approved it. His role in giving authorization for such acts can rightly be considered criminal malfeasance, as should his orders to invade Iraq. Among the many justifications the Bush administration considered for their invasion and occupation of Iraq, they chose finally to make the alleged weapons of mass destruction existence their chief complaint. The book, The Case Against George W. Bush by Stephen C. Markoff.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. Tomorrow is Women's Equality Day. We need to be electing more progressive women. We need economic, political, social equality for women in our society. It's regular listeners to this program know for years and years I've been singing this song about if you want to get population under control, establish economic, political, educational equality for women, and that will happen very quickly. But that's just like one little piece of a whole spectrum of things. Lala Wu is on the line with us, the co-founder and executive director of Sister District. Lala is a former environmental and clean energy lawyer, now working on this issue. SisterDistrict.com is the website, and also Sister_District is the Twitter handle. And Lala's personal Twitter handle is _Lala, Lala, _Wu, WU_. And Lala, welcome back to the program. Tell us about Women's Equality Day tomorrow, and what, in your opinion, are some of the positive stories that we really need to be hearing and focusing on and helping us to forget, you know, the insanity of the Trump years and the COVID and everything else.
Well, Tom, it's great to be here again. Thank you for having me on. We are very, very excited to be celebrating Women's Equality Day tomorrow. This marks the centennial of the 19th Amendment, which, of course, prohibits discrimination based on sex for voting. It's really amazing to think that tomorrow is the day that marks 100 years since this amendment was ratified by 2/3 of the states in this country. And I think it's really a time for us to reflect on how much has been accomplished and to honor and to celebrate the courage of the many suffragettes and the many women who came before us who fought for equal rights. You know, that context in the 19th century was that women had very, very few rights as compared to what we have today. Women could not, for example, inherit property. They only made half of what men's pay was. And now we've had some major legal and cultural and other shifts. But as you and your listeners likely know, there is still a lot of work to be done.
And a lot of work actually is being done. And, you know, I mean, New York just got a woman as a governor, although, you know, by virtue of a man once again screwing things up. You know, I think about the Iroquois Confederacy and how 4 out of 5 of the Iroquois nations at first contact with Europeans, the only people who were allowed to essentially vote in those communities were women, you know, the elders. How much different our society, and I say this as a man, how different in a positive way our society would be. An old friend of mine, a professor of psychiatry at Harvard University, we were having lunch one day, and we were talking about drug abuse. We had been giving lectures that day on attention deficit disorder. And he said, you know what the most dangerous drug in the world is? And I was like, what? And expecting him to say, you know, cocaine or something. And he says, testosterone. He says it's responsible for most of the wars. And, you know, he just goes on in this rant, you know, this Harvard professor of psychiatry. And I think he's right. And so tell us what sisterdistrict.com is doing, you know, to help bring about at least more equality in our society.
Absolutely. So Sister District builds progressive power in state legislatures, and we do support both men and women and trans and all other kinds of candidates, everyone out there who fits into our democratic values that we want to see. And we represent and we support so many women and women of color in particular because we understand the importance of representation, because we understand that this world will, as you suggest, be a better place if we've got more than just, you know, straight, cis, white men in office. And so this way we are looking to build a reflective democracy that really represents the broader populace, has all the voices so that we can make advancements on issues, not just your typical women's issues, you know, which are important, of course, reproductive justice and childcare, for example. These are vitally, vitally important issues that are usually thought of as quote unquote women's issues, but on all kinds of issues, on infrastructure, which, by the way, I think childcare fits into that definition, you know, on labor, on the environment, on all of these other issues. We really, really need all kinds of voices, including women's voices, at all levels of government.
You know, I think the average person is familiar with structural impediments, for example, racial justice. You know, I think redlining, for example, is widely understood nowadays. And I remember back in the early 1970s, Louise and I were married in 71, and I think it was 72 or 73 was the first year that a woman could get a credit card without her husband's permission and signature. They were very strange times. I mean, it was a very different time for women. What are the, but that was then, this is now. What are the structural impediments to women having economic and political power that, perhaps most people are unaware of, or that everybody is aware of, that really need to be, that we need to go after? I know, for example, the Equal Rights Amendment still hasn't been, put into law. But what are there specifics here that we should be focusing on and talking about?
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. And before I go into that, I just want to acknowledge that, progress is not linear, that yes, in 71, 72, we made these leaps. Over time, we've made these changes, but it doesn't mean that we can't slide backwards. Handmaid's Tale is not necessarily such science fiction, and we need to always be vigilant and to understand that it's not necessarily a straight line. So with that in mind, yes, there's so many different structural barriers, and volumes have been written, but I think a few important layers to point out are, there are legal barriers, as you mentioned. For example, the Equal Rights Amendment has still not been passed. There are cultural barriers. There are these persistent ideas that women are not fit to lead or to have positions outside of the household. You mentioned that Kathy Hochul became Governor Kathy Hochul in New York, and the first woman governor in that state. But it's important to remember that she's the 45th woman governor in the course of the history of the United States, and that as compared to 1,000 male governors that have served, and then thinking also about how of those 45 women governors in our entire country's history, 12 of them have come to power not through election, but because there was some kind of scandal or because the governor who was outgoing could no longer serve. And it seems to be that no matter what kind of progress we're kind of making, and Barbara Rodriguez at the 19th wrote a nice piece about this recently, that there still is this sort of mental block, a failure of imagination to see women in certain kind of apex positions of power. So that's why representation is so important. It's my hope that positions like Hochul's, they can kind of wedge the door open, help people see more broadly what the possibilities are when women are in office, when women are in power, and what they can do. This exists, in corporate settings as well. This matters for voters, how we think about who votes, who we target, who we turn out. It really permeates all aspects of our society. And I will say one more time, just because it is such a hot button issue right now, that childcare is infrastructure. If we don't have ways to, support families with children, then it's going to be very, very hard to make sure that all the adults in that family have the opportunity to work if they want to. And this is a huge, huge issue.
Yeah, we need to be thinking of pre-K the same way we think of public schools. And it is part of our infrastructure. We're talking with Lala Wu, the co-founder and executive director of Sister District. Lala, we're going to hit a hard break here that I can't control in just a second. SisterDistrict.com is the website. Tell us about the organization and what people can do who want to support the work that you're doing.
Absolutely. Go to sisterdistrict.com, sign up, you'll get connected with your local team, all kinds of volunteer and actions that you can take right now that are really concrete in races that really matter to increase representation of women and others, to build that democracy that we want to see. If you're feeling like you don't know what you want to do, this is the way to do it. So please check us out.
This is an entry point into activism. SisterDistrict.com. Lala Wu, the co-founder and executive director. Thank you, Lala. Great talking with you.
You too. Thanks so much, Tom. And
Sister_District over on Twitter if you want to check that out as well. We'll be back. See, there's a lot of good things you can do. There is optimism. We'll be back.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Speaking the truth to multinational corporations would really rather they didn't know about. I'll be back with your calls on the other side of this. More of the news today. And welcome back. Nicholas in San Cristobal, New Mexico. Hey, Nicholas, thank you for watching us on YouTube, and thank you for helping moderate our chat room on YouTube. What's on your mind today?
It's an honor, Tom, truly. It's also a bit of labor of love. Sometimes it's a bit much, but overall, it's wonderful. Listen,
thank you.
How incredible to follow on the heels of this wonderful, wonderful woman, Lala Lu. I mean, if she doesn't absolutely, resonate with the true power of positively, I don't know who does. And thank you so much for having her on. This is just amazing, which sort of leads to what I've been doing to sort of relieve the PTSD that we've all been pretty much suffering through for a long while. Really,
we should rename that post-Trump syndrome, PTS.
To a degree, yes, but I think it's really been going on for a very long time because of all the things we've learned about the world now.
Yeah.
I was rooting around for something completely different in the house here over the weekend, and I found a very old dog-eared copy of Baba Ram Dass's Be Here Now, so I reread it, and it holds up.
Oh, yeah.
And it's important. It's just, you understand this. Many people will think we're just wacky here for a second, but, it's so important. It's so powerful. That led to a conversation I just had with a friend who adopted a rescue dog and named the dog, get this, Citizen Cope, because the dog is helping him and his wife to cope with all that is wrong with the world.
Sweet.
Which then led me to start finishing a book I've been writing for years called How the Dogs I've Saved Me. And I've rescued over 30 dogs here in Mexico over the years.
Whoa.
And the power of the innocence, the pure innocence of animals, and all that has to teach us about our own if we allow it deeply.
Sean, who has 2 rescue dogs, is bowing down to you right now, Nicholas.
I know. She and I
physically
chatted a bit. She's a big-time cat lover and animal lover, and yeah. And another thing I would advise people to do is to reduce the number of their peripheral acquaintances in life and get back to the real heart friends who have supported them through their lifetimes,
Mm-hmm.
and to give them the majority of our time in important ways, simple important ways, sharing a meal, sharing a beer, sharing a joint, if I dare say it.
Yeah. Or just making a phone
getting
call.
on with the actual, just
I mean, my
getting on
friend
with
in
the
New York, I call him 3 or 4
life.
times a week. It's just, his wife just died. He just went through surgery. He's having some tough times.
That is so
reach out to
horrible.
people.
I'm so sorry for both of you. Really.
Well,
But yeah,
this is life.
it is what it's all about. You know?
You just do it. You do the best you can. But that's great. So reading and writing and the power of animals have been your.
I believe in it firmly. They have a lot to teach us that we used to know that we have forgotten.
Mm-hmm. Well, we're all mammals here. I mean, we all share some basic instinctual stuff, and
we sure do.
All right, if you don't think animals are up there, just observe them. Our dog knows when she's done something she shouldn't, or she knows when she wants some attention.
Don't we all?
All the same emotions that we have. Nicholas, because they have a limbic brain just like we do. Nicholas, thank you for the call. It's always nice to hear from you, my friend. Thank you. And thank you again for the great work you're doing on our chat room over on YouTube. 21 minutes past the hour, back with more of your calls and the news of the day right after this. Change starts with you. You can be calling your Democratic or Republican representatives to let them know what you think by calling 202-224-3121. It's the Capitol switchboard. It'll get you right through to them. So the Republican Party has sold themselves all the way back to the 60s, really, as the serious party. We're the party of issues. We take stuff seriously. We have serious policy analysis. We have serious constitutional analysis. We are serious about the economy. We have all these think tanks, Heritage and Competitive Enterprise and Cato, and we've got the Federalist Society finding serious judges that we can put on the federal bench, And in response to 4 dead Americans, they got real serious. 5 House committees, 2 Senate committees. They created a separate House Select Committee for 4 dead Americans. That was Benghazi. Thousands of hours of testimony. The Secretary of State testifying for 8 hours straight. But when 5 people die at the Capitol, not so much. Got a new video about it over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you. And let's see here, Kathy in Madison, Wisconsin. Hey, Kathy, what's on your mind today?
Hi. Well, like I told the screener there, for about the past 5 days, I've been researching what's going on in Afghanistan with a backward look at what the Trump administration had done, because I remembered a few things that weren't getting reported. And one of the major things is that in the beginning of his administration, about March of 2017, his budget included about a 9% personnel cut, about 200,000 workers in the federal government. The State Department overwhelmingly got hit more than any other department. Now, why would that happen? At the same time, he's getting his daughter and Jared Kushner elevated into positions within the White House, bypassing laws on nepotism and overriding people on security clearances. Right. He's got Jared running around in charge of everything, running over to the Middle East, making God knows what kind of deals.
Right. Taking the positions that the State Department historically did, but they laid off a bunch of State Department people.
Exactly. Obviously, he didn't want any oversight. Right. Rex Tillerson went in there and actually set up a subgroup, a parallel department in there. The people, the interviews that they had with people at the time, their hair were on fire about this because they were gutting the department, meanwhile setting up a department that was getting, really secretive. We know that Tillerson came in from Exxon with all kinds of cozy arrangements from Putin, who had even awarded Tillerson a medal, for Pete's sake. They were targeted on, what was it, that deal, the pipeline Rosneft or something like that, that they were trying to get through. I haven't got it into the full research on that, but I do know about it. So while that's going on, he's got all these little secret deals running around that people doesn't know about. And I think people kind of overlooked, especially with the Mueller administration, the influence of Vladimir Putin on Trump. So who's Trump listening to? In a report that came out early this year from The Guardian, they actually got the physical Kremlin documents showing about the operation that the Russians were pulling on Trump. They saw him as weak. They saw him as kind of nuts, delusional, and a whole lot of things. The Guardian reported that in, excuse me, this was a different report. That was a CNN report. The CNN report showed that multiple senior officials in the White House were extremely disturbed by Trump's phone calls with leaders like Putin and Erdogan, to whom he was extremely solicitous. He was never prepared for what he was talking about, and especially with Putin, he was more concerned with promoting himself about what a great leader he was, how much better than Obama was, how much better he was than leaders of other countries. Yeah. So who was in his ear?
I think with Erdogan, Erdogan was sending him a couple $1 million a year because he had 2 Trump towers in Turkey. And in fact, Erdogan threatened him publicly, threatened to take his name off those and stop making those payments. So there's a fairly direct connection.
Deal about Trump.
I think Putin had the goods on him.
Putin with a penthouse. Yeah. We'll give you this fancy penthouse if you let us build.
I think it goes beyond that. I think the Russian intelligence had video or something like it of Trump. He was over there for the Miss Universe stuff. And,
in the CNN report, they even talk about that he had talked to Putin about the Miss Universe, about being there for the Miss Universe.
I think they've got compromising information on him. Whether he raped somebody or whether he was just hopping in bed with hookers or what it was.
Here's the other thing. interesting. In a recent interview, and I just randomly found this story. Remember how after the election, how he chopped the heads off at the Pentagon Department, put his own people in there?
Right.
Well, one of the guys was a guy by the name of Chris Miller, who was the acting defense secretary. He did an interview with Defense.com where he said that the deal that Trump struck was a ruse, that Trump never had any intention of getting troops out of there. It was a setup to get the president of Afghanistan.
And he just handed this to Biden.
Thom Hartmann Program. Call 202-808-9925.
And he just dropped this flaming sack of poop right on Joe Biden's front doorstep. I mean, that's basically what happened. We'll be back.
Today's book in our book club is The Hidden History of the War on Voting, Who Stole Your Vote and How to Get It Back, by this guy, Thom Hartmann. This is from chapter 1, or from the introduction, actually. In 2016, 6% of Americans who were eligible to vote nominated Donald Trump as the GOP's presidential candidate. It was 8% for Hillary Clinton on the Democratic side. Trump went on to be elected president by 26% of eligible voters. The modern American oligarchs have largely stayed in power using three simple elements: explicit and overt racism, massive disinformation campaigns, and voter suppression. No ideas, no push for better schools, hospitals, airports, roads, or bridges, or reform of our health, energy, or financial systems. No promise of more and better jobs. None of these staples of past presidential campaigns can be found in pretty much any Republican advertising today. Instead, the public Republican message is all about race, or the subset of race, religion. Muslim stands in for brown Arab in GOP speak, and immigration, a.k.a. brown people from south of our border, and socialism. Meanwhile, Republican secretaries of state across the nation are vigorously purging voters from the rolls. Over 17 million, more than 10% of America's active voters, in just the 2016-2018 period, according to NBC News. After the After the 5 Republican appointees on the U.S. Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in 2013, 14 GOP-controlled states moved within a year, some within days, to restrict access to the vote, particularly for communities of color, students, and retired people. In North Carolina, for example, 158 polling places were permanently closed in the 40 counties with the most African-American voters just before the 2016 election, leading to a 16% decline in African-American early voting in that state. An MIT study found that nationwide, Hispanic voters wait 150% longer in line than white voters, and black voters can expect to wait 200% longer in line to vote. In Indiana, then Governor Mike Pence's new rigorous voter ID law caused an 11.5% drop in African-American voting. Students are suing for their right to vote, and retired people who no longer drive but care passionately about their Social Security and Medicare are being turned away at the polls by the hundreds of thousands because their driver's licenses have expired. The obvious failure of 40-plus years of Reaganomics and GOP policies to maintain a functional middle class in America has been a problem for the modern GOP. In 1974, for example, the GOP had outright control of only 7 states. The message, elect us and we'll help the rich people, just didn't generally resonate with American voters. It's the reason why, outside of the fluke elections of 46 and 52, Democrats controlled the House of Representatives outright for 3 generations, from 1933 to 1996, and controlled the Senate for most of that time. Desperate to win the presidency for the GOP in 1968, Richard Nixon went so far as to commit treason by torpedoing a peace deal with President Lyndon Johnson that President Lyndon Johnson had worked out with the North and South Vietnamese. According to Abul Hassan Bani Sadr, then president of Iran, Ronald Reagan did the same thing by cutting a deal with Iran whereby they would hold on to the U.S. embassy hostages until after the 1980 presidential election, torpedoing Jimmy Carter's chances of re-election. But in 2000, the GOP changed tactics. After Reagan was almost busted for his part in Iran-Contra, he testified that he had forgotten about details of the program more than 80 times. His growing Alzheimer's spared him an indictment. They realized that getting busted for treason wasn't worth the risk. They needed a plan B, and it was deliciously simple. If most voters don't like what you're selling, then just don't let them vote. Paul Weyrich promoted this idea back in 1980 when he was campaigning for Reagan after co-founding the Heritage Foundation. And indeed, many Republican luminaries, such as William Rehnquist, who went from serving the GOP by standing in polling places and intimidating Hispanic and Native American voters in the 1960s, to becoming Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, rose up through the ranks by participating in Republican-run voter intimidation schemes. Voter suppression became the foundational go-to tactic for the GOP in 2000. Although the GOP attacked Democratic presidential nominee Al Gore with smear and innuendo, ridiculing him for helping write the legislation that created the modern internet, for example, the main thing that got George W. Bush into the White House was voter suppression. His brother, Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Bush's Secretary of State, Katherine Harris, threw somewhere between 20,000 and 90,000 African-American voters off the rolls. They were able to get the vote close enough. The 5 Republican appointees to the Supreme Court functionally awarded Bush the presidency. The BBC covered this in 2001 in 2 major investigative reports that were seen all over the world, except on any American media. By 2016, the Republican Party had fine-tuned its voter suppression and intimidation systems to the point that they ran like well-oiled machines in nearly 30 states. Between the 2012 and 2016 presidential elections, for example, Ohio had purged more than 2 million voters from its rolls, the vast majority, more than 2 to 1, in heavily African-American and Hispanic counties. The 5 Republican appointees on the Supreme Court ruled in 2017 that they could keep it up. And other states have since adopted their new tactic of caging voters. The book, The Hidden History of the War on Voting, by me.
Missed my opening rant today? It's usually published over at HartmannReport.com, where you can read it and share it with your friends for free. Check it out, HartmannReport.com. So with some fancy footwork math, you can take the GDP of the United States, the productivity, the amount of wealth that is produced, or goods and services that are produced every year by American workers, and divide it by the number of workers, and what you get is that the average worker in America is producing about $75 an hour worth of value for their employer. And the minimum wage pays them about 10% of that value. Now, back in 1950, the minimum wage paid 30% of the value of the productivity that the average worker is producing for their employer. If we took the minimum wage up to $15 an hour tomorrow, it would still be in the neighborhood of 20%. So there's a strong case for increasing the minimum wage based on history. I lay this all out in the new video that we have just for our people who are supporters of our program over at ThomHartmann.com. And welcome back. Thom Hartmann here with you and Maverick in Edmonds, Washington. Hey, Maverick, what's on your mind today?
Dobro udro, Tom. And that's Bulgarian for
Bulgarian. Oh, you're reaching into your bag of tricks here, Maverick. New languages. So what's up?
I just have this affinity for people that are different than me. And whenever I get a chance, I try to pick up at least a greeting or how to say please or thank you in a new language.
Yeah, I used to have, hello, please, and thank you in about a dozen languages. I think I'm probably down to 5 or 6 now. But anyhow, it looks like Maverick just hung up. I just lost him. So, Maverick, you could try to reconnect with us. But let's pick up Earl in Hyde Park, Illinois. Hey, Earl, what's on your mind today?
Hey, Tom. Thank you very much for taking my call. I wanted to say 2 things. One was I wanted to speak to the bug lady and ask her in her neighborhood to put up hummingbird feeds, because once you attract insects, you will also attract hummingbirds and the flowers. They use the protein from the insects to help rear their young quicker. And
they're pollinators too, aren't they?
And the other thing I wanted to ask you, now this is a fun. I've noticed that in the past that when the Delta virus took off, in other nations that it reached a plateau and then it started coming back down. The rate of increase started coming back down. Have you found any such information here in the United States yet?
I've seen no evidence of that, and it appears that the tilting back down that happened in Great Britain happened around the time that they were hitting really, really high levels of vaccination. Israel now is struggling with breakthrough infections, but they're also starting now a third dose because they think that the first and second doses are starting to wear off. Most of the breakthroughs are among older people, and most of them are not actually people getting terribly sick. So, you know, we have to take all of this. There's all kinds of moving pieces here, but I think that it's going to be quite a while. I mean, Israel's a fairly small country. I don't know their population off the top of my head. I'd be surprised if it was over 20 million. In fact, it's probably not even over 10 million. And the United States is 340 million. So we've got a lot of bodies who can be infected before we hit anything that even begins to resemble what might be herd immunity. So, you know, step by step. Anyhow, that's it. That's everything I know, Earl. Thanks a lot for the call. Kelly in Lake Havasu, Arizona. Hey, Kelly, what's on your mind?
Well, Tom, you said something earlier that I believed my entire life. When I was young and read about Einstein, it just stymied me. And you know, you had just said that, you know, energy can't be created or destroyed. Einstein proved that. Well, there was an article I just read in the Inverse yesterday that proved Einstein's last paper to be correct, which is only a 2-page paper. But the basic theory of it is, and it's way more complex than I'm boiling it down to, but the basic theory of it is that light can create matter. And scientists, after 106 years of that paper being around, just proved that.
Well, if you don't think that's true, just look at the reverse of it, matter becoming light. It's called a nuclear explosion, and it can blind you.
Yes. With that line of thinking, my entire life, you know, just in what I've read and studied along that same line of thinking, what I'd come up with was that, you know, how when people have near-death experiences and they make it back from it, and they, you know, the majority of the stories was that there was a light and it felt warm and welcoming, and my summation of that is the light is probably some major form of energy that's pulling your energy back into it.
Yeah, I think it's the universe. I think it's all of creation.
Exactly, because the universe is math. Everything can be assigned a number. There's no such thing as creating new souls, right? They've proven it mathematically that there's no way that every person that's born is a brand new soul. The universe couldn't sustain that math. So if I'm going to pass, if I can maintain the thought long enough while I'm passing, is I'm not going to the light. I don't want to go through this cycle again. Now, I know that it's supposed to be cherished, and that's why I'm cherishing it every day. Because if I don't go into the light and I go into the dark, which is the universe, there's a lot more to learn out there. But this is the whole point of my concept, is that you go out into the universe, it could be eons before you get to regain this form. Now, if you can only imagine spending eons by yourself with your own energy.
Yeah, all of this, Kelly, your epistemology here all entirely hangs on the theory that you as an individual entity, that your ego, that your unique consciousness and experiences is somehow intact through that process.
Yes, I am aware.
That's like one of the great, I mean, I could argue both sides of that. One of the great debates.
It's just that when you brought it up, you know, I've told this theory to thousands of people over the course of my life, and every time I tell the concept, people are just blown away with it because it touches somebody in some way. In every person I've talked to, and I have one recommendation for you. It's a documentary called CE5, Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, and this documentary is done by, and I forget the gentleman's name, but he and you can it's on Prime, it's on Netflix, but this is the guy that founded SETI. And what he's doing is he's got groups around the world. You'll see in the documentary, he's got groups around the world, and they get together usually in the evenings, somewhere out open, so that it's open sky, and everybody sits there and meditates and projects their location. And what they found is that not only can they get other beings from other parts of the universe to come here, they're doing it through astral projection. So not only are these beings come here, which in the documentary they actually show a picture of. You can see this guy with the helmet on, and I mean it looks something like out of a sci-fi. Where now they're actually projecting and going there, to the point where one guy that he had talked to had actually projected himself so hard into this other location that he actually ran into a spaceship in space.
Yes.
And then had to remind himself not to be so solid.
Kelly, we're wandering kind of far afield into Art Bell territory, and I don't object to that specifically, but I'm going to stop at this point because thank you for sharing those stories. Teresa in Asheville, North Carolina. Hey, Teresa, what's on your mind?
Oh, hi, Tom.
Hey, Teresa, get your mouth closer to the microphone, and we'll be good.
Okay. What I was going to say is that one of the things that I have done, and have done for a while, but more in this pandemic, is I have a little brown leather bag, and I always go to the bank and get $10 bills. And so I might have a few of them in there. And I give these $10 bills out to various situations, like a homeless person, or sometimes there was a little girl behind me and the other day in a little thing, and her mother couldn't afford an $8.98 book about baby animals, so I bought it for her. And a lot of times, or I'll just maybe get the drive-in, person at the drive-in behind me and surprise them. And I like $10 bills because they're not too much, to get, but they're a little bit better than a $5 bill. So I always say Hamilton is a great play, but Hamilton is on the front of my favorite bill.
I love it. Teresa, you're wonderful. Thank you for sharing that story with us. That's absolutely beautiful. I truly appreciate it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Tom.
Sure. Good talking to you. Maverick, you want to finish that thought you started when you, one of us dropped you. If it was me, I apologize. I don't think it was.
Yeah, it's probably the technology, Tom, because I'm talking on a Bluetooth and my hands were nowhere near my phone.
So anyhow, what was on your mind?
Your opening kind of question was, what are you doing to deal with the stress of these times? And I'll tell you what, a really, really quick story. About a year ago, I was ready to break down. I did, actually. I was on the phone with my girlfriend, and I broke into tears. And she kind of talked me down. And my drinking started going up. I usually have 2 or 3 drinks after work because I have a physical job. But it went up to 5 or 6, and I was like, this is not good. This has got to stop. And we had a little talk, and we decided that we were going to carve out some extra time every day just to be with each other. So we kind of upped our love life quotient a little bit and found it was very good for relieving stress, and it strengthened our relationship. And my suggestion was to the listeners is what's helped me is, and I don't have any science to back this up, and I think you know that I'm a man of science, and I really require evidence, but being nice to somebody, an act of kindness to a total stranger, makes you feel good and warm somehow, and it makes a difference.
When I was a little kid, Maverick, when I was like 8 years old, in Cub Scouts, our den leader told us that, the Scouts motto, or I don't know if it's the motto or the obligation or whatever, was you must do a good deed every day. And what she said was that the definition of a good deed was something that helps another person, and they never will know that you're the one who did it.
Yeah, why not?
And I'm telling you, Maverick, those things are damn hard to find. It's like every day I had to work to find something that I could do to help, my little brother or my mom or our next door neighbor in some way that they had no idea that I had helped them. And I just think it's so powerful. It is so powerful, as opposed to doing something nice for somebody in exchange for the adulation that you get, you know?
Yeah, and if I may, about a year ago, you presented something on the air that it stayed with me to the point where I listened to a rebroadcast to write it down. And you were providing a timeline, and it was like, you know, we've been through worse. If you were born in the year 1900, you know, you saw the Spanish flu and millions of people dying, you know, by the time you were in your teens, and then World War I, and you just went on and on.
The Great Depression, yeah.
I think it was, yeah, and I don't know, maybe it might be worth revisiting that timeline.
Yeah, Americans have been through hell, right? I mean, if you were born in 1900, your grandparents or even your parents might have fought in the Civil War. And then you had to put up with, you know, the Spanish-American War and the Great Depression of 1898. And, well, actually, and then World War I, and then, you know, the Great Depression, and then World War II, and you know, that generation, those generations really saw a lot. And you know, I think it's probably a good thing to acknowledge.
It really gave me a comparison, a reference point.
Yeah, I'm with you. Maverick, I just hit the wrong button at the wrong time, so forgive me. We've got something funky going on here. Here we go. Yeah? No, yes, no, maybe? Okay, let's pick up some of your phone calls. Randy in Ottawa, Iowa. Hey, Randy, you wanted to weigh in on whether the soul is intact when it leaves the body?
Yeah, yes, I did, Tom. I heard you speaking with Kelly, and you had your doubts about it.
Well, I just am not sure. My wife has a kind of a middle loop. She thinks that we all kind of go into she follows Sufi Sam from the 60s in San Francisco. That we all go into a giant soup pot like goulash, and then when a new baby is born, the great ladle pulls out some of the soup and pours it in. Okay, so what's your theory?
Well, it's not a theory. I know this for a fact.
Okay.
That souls, when they cross over, they are who they are. That at inception, that energy that is created by the birth of that child stays intact for its entire life and for eternity or until time ends. And it carries with it as it leaves the body, or as it dies, it loses its nervous system, so it feels no pain. But yet it still carries trauma and things like that from their death and from the entirety of their life. But it's not like that your soul dissipates at the time of death. Your soul is your soul. And there are a lot of people or a lot of believers in reincarnation and stuff like that. And I'm certain that there are a lot of good attributes and people who think that way and contribute to future generations. But there's a lot of things going on in the world right now that are destructive to souls and destructive to people before they pass on. And they aren't net gains for the future of the melting pot, I would say. Yeah. Yeah. It's not like a general thing. It is each soul is unto itself an energy that is created for its entirety.
Randy, I have a memory that my earliest memory of this was when I was maybe 6 or 7 years old, and but my memory is of being like 5 or 6 years old and sitting in an apartment with flowered wallpaper, 19th century or early 20th century flowered wallpaper on the wall, and a calendar on the wall. And the calendar was from 1917 or 1918, and I was waiting for my dad to come home from World War I. It is such a vivid memory, and I was born in 1951. World War I was long gone, and it is such a vivid memory. And then there's all these stories. I mean, there's books compiled of these stories of little kids, you know, pre-second demyelination, pre-7 years old, who remember extraordinary details of previous lifetimes. And when they track them down, they find that very often that, yes, we can identify where this kid was, what the name was, what they, all these details. What do you think of that?
Yeah, well, I believe I believe that is factual. I believe that that's accurate, that the soul would have to stay intact for that to happen. And it would have to visit upon this memory upon a new soul or a soul that was in the future. So that I verify what that is to be factual. And there's other things I'd like to talk to you about, but I don't know that I'd like to do it on national radio.
Okay.
But, all right. Hey, I love you, Tom, and your soul will be intact till the end of time.
Well, in a way I hope so, and in a way I hope not. I just don't know. But, Randy, thank you. Thank you very much for the call. I got to run.
Our 1-hour free podcast recaps our show, and it's available wherever fine podcasts are found. And we have the full 3-hour podcast available over at thomhartmann.com if you want to really support our program.
Hey, we have a new video out about the 1776 Commission. Remember this commission that Donald Trump put together to explain the history of America, to have true principles, because history is being distorted by things like the New York Times 1619 report, No, seriously, this is what Donald Trump said, that, we're engaging now in revisionist history by highlighting the history of slavery in the United States. And so he put together this bizarre commission, and now in the state of South Carolina, Senator Dwight Loftus and others have introduced legislation requiring that Trump's commission, which had no historians on it, 18 people, not a single historian, that commission's findings be taught as history in the public schools in South Carolina. It's absolutely mind-boggling. I mean, it's like they want to take us back to the 1930s. Check it out at thomhartmann.com. And welcome back. Eric in Erie, Pennsylvania. Hey, Eric, what's on your mind today?
Hey, afternoon, Tom. The Cub Scout motto, do your best.
Was that it? Do your best?
Yeah, I was in for a very long 3 weeks before my buddy's mom kicked me out for, we'll just say, my filthy mouth.
Okay.
I think I was like 8 or 9, and then maybe a month later she kicked him out, and 45, 46 years later we're still brothers.
Yeah, I think I was in for a little less than a year, but I was not an enthusiastic scout either.
Well, I never made it any further, but the Boy Scout motto is the one that sticks with me, which is always be prepared, which if you ask anybody who knows me, I always am. I've got a baggie, I got a tattoo of Felix the Cat that dates back to the 80s because his bag of tricks, he could always pull whatever he needed out of it.
There you
go. The reason I called this soul thing, I'm a total non-believer in anything that I can't see, smell, taste, weigh, put on a scale. But if there is a soul that deserves to come back, it is that of the dearly departed Charlie Watts, the Rolling Stones. The
Rolling Stone drummer?
Yeah, we lost him yesterday.
Yeah, 80 years old.
And if you look back at the early history of the Stones, they fought for desegregation way before anybody else in America. They came here, they said,
they refused to play segregated venues down in Florida and Georgia.
Right. And they, those things.
That was in the 60s.
And they stuck their neck out with something to lose, and a lot of commercial artists won't do that. So, I used to work on a landscape crew when I was going through community college paying my way, and we'd listen to the radio. And we'd be building decks and koi ponds and stuff. And we got classic rock radio on because we were boomers and Gen Xers. And Brown Sugar would come on, and all the guys would start taunting and teasing me, singing it to me, because I had a black girlfriend in the 1980s as a Gen Xer, and that wasn't really done then. So, grew up with a cop for a father. I don't think he was a racist at his core, but doing that job, he developed some attitudes that were pretty toxic.
Yeah.
So, pretty funny that.
Sounds like you had a heck of a life, Eric.
Well, it wouldn't appeal to me normally, but Maverick was talking about it and the guy before him, and I'm like, you know what? Just in case I'm wrong and any of that's true, bring Charlie back.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, Charlie Watts. Eric, thank you. And will Keith Richardson ever die, or is he already pre-embalmed, by... I don't know. Oh, bless them all. And you too, actually. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for listening to the program, for participating in the program, for letting our stations know that you're listening, for letting our sponsors know that you support us. Thank you so much. Thank you for helping share light in the world. I know you are. Thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. Keep it up. Hey, Tag, you're in. Have a great afternoon. Be good to yourself and the people around you. We'll see you tomorrow.
You've been listening to Thom Hartmann. For audio and video archives, visit thomhartmann.com.
These companies support the Thom Hartmann Program. They are HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit delivery service. More information at hellofresh.com, code TOM. CB Distillery for sleeping and pain relief. More info at cbdistillery.com, code TOM. Dinovite, only the best all-natural pet supplements. More info at dinovite.com. Annie's Kit Clubs, creativity delivered right to your door. More info at annieskitclubs.com/Tom. Wild Alaskan Company, delicious, sustainably sourced seafood delivered right to your door. More information at wildalaskancompany.com/Tom. And Mack Weldon, reinventing men's basics. More info at mackweldon.com/Tom.
We say fight back!